The Ship of Theseus, Identity and Process. The most profound truths are often found lurking not in clarity or certainty, but within the deep, illogical contradictions that underpin human experience. We chase meaning through fixed concepts, yet meaning only truly emerges when we embrace the inherent tension of the paradoxes that hold our reality together. As you settle deeper into this moment, allowing your body to relax and your focus to narrow, we are going to explore the core philosophical dilemmas that define existence, the very tensions that make life feel simultaneously meaningless and absolutely true. This journey is not about finding answers that soothe, but about identifying the questions that catalyze growth. It is about learning to recognize the necessary lies we tell ourselves to function. We begin tonight by confronting the most intimate paradox of all, the paradox of the self. What if the identity you hold so tightly, the history you cherish, and the person you believe yourself to be, is fundamentally a beautiful, necessary, and constantly updating fiction? This is the ancient thought experiment known as the Ship of Theseus. It confronts us immediately with the unsettling reality of change versus permanence. We define ourselves by what lasts, our character, our memories, our foundational experiences. But what happens when everything that constitutes the physical structure of that identity is replaced? Imagine the legendary vessel of the Greek hero, preserved for centuries as a national monument. To protect its integrity, every time a plank begins to rot, it is meticulously replaced with a new, equally crafted piece of timber. This process continues relentlessly, board by board, nail by nail. The ship maintains its shape, its function, and its historical designation as the Ship of Theseus. Yet after 50 years, 100% of the original wood, the atoms, the matter, the actual physical constituents of the original vessel, are gone. The primary question is simple, yet devastating. Is the ship that remains still the Ship of Theseus? Most people instinctively argue yes, believing in the continuity of form and function. It has occupied the same space, borne the same name, and fulfilled the same historical purpose. Its identity, therefore, is rooted in its narrative and its spatial existence over time, rather than its material composition. But the paradox deepens further, illustrating the true fragility of material identity. What if a second person, a collector, systematically gathered every discarded original plank? What if they took those collected rotten pieces and reassembled them perfectly, creating a structurally identical ship anchored in a nearby harbor? Now we have two ships. One has historical continuity. It never left the dock, but is made of all new parts. The second has material continuity. It is made exclusively of the original parts, but was disassembled and reassembled later. Which vessel, if either, holds the authentic identity of the Ship of Theseus? The conflict reveals that identity cannot be held exclusively by matter, nor can it be defined solely by continuous history. It exists primarily in the relational agreement, the narrative we impose upon the object, or in this case, the individual. Now turn that lens inward. Every component of your physical self is undergoing this replacement process continuously. Your body is replacing nearly all its cells over a span of 7 to 10 years. The molecular structure of the you listening to this narrative right now is demonstrably different from the you who started college, the you who experienced your first heartbreak, or even the you who woke up last month. You are not just changing, you are fundamentally replacing the material foundation of your existence. But the replacement is not just physical, it is psychological. Your beliefs, your core values, your political views, and your emotional responses are the psychological planks of your consciousness. They are constantly being exchanged and upgraded based on new experiences, new insights, or new trauma. The memory you hold dear is not a fixed recording. It is a reconstruction crafted by your current self to serve your present needs. Your past self, defined by old beliefs and reactions, is functionally a different entity. If the ship of your identity is composed entirely of new planks, new cells, new thoughts, new emotional blueprints, then the fear that we are losing ourselves is based on a misunderstanding of what the self actually is. The profound stability we yearn for is an illusion. We are not fixed monuments. We are processes. We are not nouns. We are verbs. This realization is not frightening. It is liberating. If identity is the continuous replacement of planks, then the painful planks, the regrets, the deep-seated fears, the trauma responses, and the limitations you inherited or acquired are tied to a ship that, materially and psychologically, no longer exists. You are constantly building the ship of Theseus even as you sail it. You have permission to let go of the rotting wood because that wood is already gone. Your identity is not defined by who you were, but by the current, instantaneous intention of the continuous process of becoming. You are not who you were yesterday, and that inherent instability is the magnificent, relentless engine of your continual emergence. 2. Schrödinger's cat, the power of the observer. The most famous thought experiment in physics isn't really about quantum mechanics. It's about you. It's about the terrifying, inevitable moment you realize you are the observer, and that your observation carries weight heavy enough to crush infinite possibility into singular reality. If everything were possible for you right now, how would you know what is real? Before you open your eyes each morning, before you articulate a desire or name a fear, you exist in a state of pure, terrifying potential. We must talk about Schrödinger's cat. In 1935, Erwin Schrödinger introduced this macabre scenario to expose the absurdity of applying quantum rules to our macroscopic world. Inside that famous box, isolated from all external influence, the feline exists in a superposition. It is mathematically and physically both alive and dead. It remains in this dual, contradictory state until the moment the box is opened, the moment the measurement is taken. It only collapses into one definite reality, one outcome, one existence, when it is observed. The profound, unsettling core of this concept is that possibilities don't just exist. They are simultaneously real until they are forced to choose. You are that box. Right now, you are the person who quits their job and travels the world, and simultaneously, the person who dedicates their life to stability and quiet achievement. You are the great artist, and you are the contented spectator. You exist in this fluid, undecided realm where every path you could possibly take is simultaneously running. Wave functions of potential selves constantly overlapping. The great dilemma of human existence is that you cannot live infinitely. To choose is to observe. The moment you define yourself, the moment you commit to the decision, take the definitive job, say the resounding yes or no to a future, you open the box of your own identity. In that instant, billions of potential selves collapse and die. That is the necessary tragedy of meaning creation. We mourn the death of the other versions of ourselves, the versions that still live vibrantly in the realm of probability. The tension is palpable. Meaninglessness lies in perpetual potential. Tragedy lies in actualized reality. This mechanism is precisely why commitment feels so heavy in the modern age. We are constantly exposed to the infinite possibilities others are embodying. Social media becomes a relentless quantum reality check. Every scroll is a glimpse into a parallel box affirming that the alternative paths were viable, perhaps even superior. The anxiety you feel when making a big decision, that paralyzing fear of closing the door, is not simple fear of failure. It is the fundamental existential dread of forcing the quantum wave function of your life to collapse. We cling to potential because potential is perfect. Actuality is messy and finite. Understanding the observer effect transforms how you view choice. The meaning of your life is not a static object you discover through introspection. It is an active phenomenon you perform into being. You are not waiting for reality to reveal your true self. You are the force that compels reality to solidify into existence. This perspective teaches you that the weight of responsibility is directly proportional to the power of your observation. If you live a life of perpetual hedging, refusing to collapse the function, you remain untouched, safe, uncommitted, and, ultimately, existentially meaningless. The tragedy is not making the wrong choice. The tragedy is refusing to choose at all, thereby condemning yourself to remain perpetually undefined. Embrace the collapse. Recognize that while the act of observation destroys infinite possibility, it is the only mechanism powerful enough to create one undeniable, imperfect, real, and truly meaningful existence. Choose your reality and accept the necessary ghost of every self you leave behind. The paradox of choice, freedom, and its trap. When did the promise of absolute freedom start to feel like a weight? You stand at the threshold of 1,000 open doors, careers you could pivot into, identities you could adopt, loves you could pursue, yet you feel utterly stuck. The true trap is not a lack of options. It's the exhaustive requirement to choose the absolute best one, and to live with the knowledge of every alternative you simultaneously destroyed. This is the central friction of modern existence, the paradox of choice. We were raised on the sacred American belief that maximum opportunity equals maximum happiness. The more choices, the more control. The more control, the more fulfilled the life. But the data, and more powerfully your own anxiety, tells a different, darker story. Choice overload doesn't liberate, it paralyzes. It turns every decision, no matter how trivial, from which streaming show to which life partner, into a high-stakes calculation carrying the heavy risk of definitive failure. Imagine you are standing in a magnificent, endless library. Every book ever written, across all languages and all time, is available to you instantly for free. Initially, it's a moment of ecstasy, infinite knowledge. But after a few minutes, a slow dread settles in. How can you possibly read the right book? If you choose the 300-page biography on the shelf closest to you, you are actively rejecting the billions of other possible narratives, the undiscovered theories, the untold poems. The infinity of the library ceases to be a resource. It becomes a profound, paralyzing burden of opportunity cost. The mechanism of this trap is twofold and deeply insidious. First, choice overload activates a behavioral state called maximizing. You cease searching for good enough, the pragmatic state of satisficing, and instead demand the absolute best possible outcome. This demand is intrinsically irrational in a world of infinite variables, thus guaranteeing dissatisfaction. The internal pressure is relentless. If you make a good choice, it only means you failed to make the perfect one. Second, this condition aggressively breeds anticipatory regret. Because you have consciously rejected hundreds of viable alternatives, you spend your mental energy constantly comparing your chosen reality to the brilliant, unlived realities lurking just beyond your decision point. That persistent counterfactual thinking, the "what if I had chosen differently," erodes your satisfaction, even when the actual choice you made was objectively good. Your life is not judged on its merits. It is judged on the gap between your reality and your potential. Look at the landscape of modern identity and relationship. We are encouraged to relentlessly curate and optimize our lives, not just live them. Your career is not a path. It is an optimized portfolio requiring constant reevaluation. Your relationship is not a connection built on mutual commitment. It is a temporary selection from a global market of partners, eternally subject to upgrade. When every available option is presented as a potential superior version of yourself, the simple, quiet act of being here becomes an act of insufficient ambition. You never truly settle into the quiet joy of what is, because you are too busy mourning the potential of what could have been. The philosophical implication is clear. True psychological freedom does not come from the availability of options, but from the voluntary acceptance of necessary constraint. Meaning is forged in the fire of limitation. To commit to one career, one person, or one philosophy is to actively destroy the illusion of infinite alternatives. It is a terrifying yet essential act of self-definition. We are forced to confront the fact that happiness often requires a conscious willingness to close doors, not because they weren't valuable, but because we need the silent, contained space created by their absence to finally appreciate the room we chose to stand in. Perhaps meaning isn't found by searching exhaustively through every possibility, but by defining the sacred, quiet space where possibility ends. The true paradox of choice is that we only truly become free when we voluntarily choose our cage. Most minds drift away before reaching this point, but you're still here. Leave your like so I'll know your mind didn't wander. 4. The paradox of friendship, the structure of connection. Have you ever felt utterly alone in the presence of someone you love deeply? That strange, silent, terrifying space that opens up between two people who know too much about each other. We enter into the deepest connections seeking dissolution, a merging, and eradication of the self that feels too lonely to manage. Yet the paradox of friendship reveals that the strongest bonds are not built on overlap, but on a precise and radical independence. The required condition for true intimacy is not closeness, but isolation. We define connection incorrectly. It is not the simple, warm overlap of a Venn diagram. True connection is the structure created when two fully realized, distinct entities stand alone, yet choose to direct their gravitational force toward one another. Before you can stand together, you must first know how to stand absolutely, terrifyingly alone. That foundational solitude is what gives the shared structure its necessary tensile strength. Consider the metaphor of two ships anchored in a vast, unpredictable ocean. The anchor ropes are the connection, defined entirely by the distance they span. If the ships drift too close, they crash, they scrape, they tangle their rigging, and they cease to function as ships. They become a single, immobilized wreck. If they drift too far, the ropes snap, and the connection dissolves into meaningless memory. True friendship is not the merging of the vessels. It is the mastery of the tension in those ropes, a constant, necessary gap that defines the strength of the bond. We call this the necessary gap, and it is the most difficult space to tolerate. The tension is brutal because intimacy demands that we show our highest, most polished self, and simultaneously our lowest, most crumbling foundation, the parts of our structure we desperately try to hide. We seek friendship primarily to validate our existence, to prove that our unique consciousness is seen and affirmed. But the moment we are truly, irrevocably seen, we are overwhelmed by the terror of being judged, found wanting, or rejected. In response to this terror, we often instinctively try to close the necessary gap. We do this by conforming, by performing the identity we think the other person needs, or by shrinking our own edges to fit neatly into their expectations. If you close the gap by conformity, the connection feels safe, warm, and comforting, but it is fundamentally false because it is not you being loved. It is a carefully curated ghost of you. If you hold the gap open, it is terrifying, a perpetual state of existential exposure, but the love and recognition that flows across it is authentic, healing, and meaningful. The structure of connection, therefore, is not unity, it is a state of continually maintained difference. In our modern existence, we have traded true intimacy for perpetual proximity. We confuse shared data with shared vulnerability. We obsessively maintain thousands of weak, low-risk digital ropes, but fear the few strong, terrifying anchors required for depth. We use the immediacy of texting and constant social validation to perpetually close that necessary gap, seeking the momentary psychological comfort of overlap. By eliminating the distance, we eliminate the very space in which profound connection can be forged. We try to merge digitally, and in doing so, we prevent the truly unique, differentiated self from ever being acknowledged, much less loved. Recognizing this paradox shifts the focus of friendship entirely. It moves the goal from receiving validation to giving radical honesty and space. It means acknowledging that profound connection requires vulnerability, not just in showing your weaknesses, but in maintaining your strength and distinction, even when it is uncomfortable for the other person. When you allow your friend the space to be utterly separate, flawed, and complete without needing them to fulfill your narrative, you stop treating them as a mirror and start treating them as an entire sovereign universe. The deepest friendships are not those that attempt to blend two lives into one homogeneous entity, but those that honor the infinite, irreducible distance between two souls, knowing that only in that impossible, respected space can true understanding be born. The connection doesn't dissolve the isolation, it illuminates it, showing you that your singularity is exactly what makes you worthy of being anchored. The unexpected hanging, the limits of logic. You spend your life trying to predict tomorrow, plotting paths through an uncertain landscape, demanding certain outcomes from an unreliable world. You gather data, you weigh probabilities, you construct flawless logical chains designed to ensure that you are never truly caught off guard. But what happens when the very act of knowing the future, the very act of establishing certainty, becomes the force that destroys that certainty? This brings us to a terrifying look at how brittle the foundations of pure reason can be when faced with the future. The unexpected hanging paradox, sometimes known as the surprise examination. It is not just a riddle designed to trip up school children. It is a profound philosophical tool that demonstrates the inherent gap between perfect logic and empirical reality, challenging the limits of what human thought can truly determine about events yet to come. Imagine a man sentenced to be executed. The judge sets the terms precisely. The execution will take place at noon on one of the 5 weekdays next week, Monday through Friday. But the day will be a complete surprise to you. You will not know it is happening until the executioner arrives that morning. The conditions are simple. The hanging must occur within the 5-day window, and it must be a surprise. The prisoner, a dedicated logician, immediately begins to reason his way out. He starts by eliminating the possibilities, using the judge's condition, the necessity of surprise, as his weapon. He reasons, the execution cannot happen on Friday. If Thursday passes and I am still alive, then I know absolutely that the only remaining day is Friday. If I know it must be Friday, then it cannot be a surprise. Therefore, Friday is logically impossible. With Friday eliminated, he moves to Thursday. Since I have established that Friday cannot be the day, the latest possible day is now Thursday. If Wednesday passes and I am still alive, I will know that Thursday is the only remaining option. If I know it must be Thursday, it is not a surprise. Therefore, Thursday is logically impossible. This elimination process is ruthless and flawless. If Thursday is out, the latest possible day is now Wednesday. If Tuesday is out, the latest is Monday. He continues the chain, eliminating Wednesday, then Tuesday, and finally Monday. The exact same logical process that eliminated Friday must logically eliminate every single day. Triumphant, the prisoner concludes, based on perfect logic and the judge's own stated condition, it is impossible for me to be hanged at all. My certain knowledge that the hanging must be a surprise prevents the hanging from ever happening. Convinced of his logical immunity, he relaxes completely. His certainty is absolute. Then Tuesday morning, the executioner knocks. The surprise is absolute. The condition was fulfilled. Where did the perfect logic go wrong? The man's certainty, derived from impeccable deduction, was shattered by the simple, arbitrary reality of the event. The paradox lies here. The certainty that prevents the surprise is exactly what makes the surprise possible. The moment he convinced himself that the hanging couldn't happen, he opened himself completely to the possibility that it would. This isn't merely about a doomed prisoner, it's about every desperate attempt we make to game the system of our own lives. We operate with the underlying belief that, given enough computation and data, we can logically calculate our way out of failure, out of heartbreak, or out of the inevitable conclusion of life itself. We map out our 5-year plan with such precision, ensuring that the path ahead is devoid of surprises, that we eliminate any possibility of risk or emotional cost. But the future, when we try to grasp it too tightly through predictive logic, often slips into absurdity. The unexpected hanging shows us that some of the most critical truths about our existence, like the inevitability and timing of change, loss, or death, are only accessible through experience, not through predictive knowledge. The logic was sound only until it encountered reality, and reality doesn't always honor the boundaries of human deduction. It reminds you that if you truly want to live, you must accept that the fundamental terms of your existence include a non-negotiable surprise clause. The surprise is not an exception to the rule of life. The radical unknowability of the next knock on the door is the rule. You must live fully, not knowing the day, because the moment you think you finally know, that knowledge becomes the most profound lie. The crocodile paradox, refusing the question. There are moments in life, and you know them well, when the very act of choosing seems to guarantee failure. You feel the cold grip of a logical structure designed not to inform you, but to hold you hostage. It is the existential dread of being locked into a self-defeating loop, a situation where your intention and your outcome are placed in fundamental, catastrophic opposition. This is the power of the crocodile paradox, a narrative structure built entirely around the unbearable pressure of a forced choice. It is a story, or perhaps a warning, about the systemic failure that occurs when a statement's truth depends entirely on its own prediction. Imagine this. A crocodile steals a child and holds it on the riverbank. The desperate mother pleads for its return. The crocodile, perhaps feeling mischievous or simply cruel, makes a promise, a condition. I will return the child if, and only if, you correctly predict whether or not I will return the child. The mother is instantly paralyzed, facing an impossible dilemma. If she guesses, you will return the child, the crocodile thinks. If I return him, her prediction was correct, so I must return him, fulfilling the condition. But if I intended to keep him, her prediction was false, and the rules demand I return him anyway, a contradiction. The system locks. Conversely, if the mother guesses, you will not return the child, the crocodile is equally snared. If the crocodile intended to keep the child, the mother's prediction was correct, which means, by the terms of the promise, the crocodile must return the child. But if the crocodile intended to return the child, the prediction was false, and the rules dictate that the crocodile must keep the child. The paradox annihilates the possibility of movement. The crocodile is bound by a contract that forces it into a state of total illogicality, regardless of its true intent. The paradox is not about the crocodile's heart. It is about the cold, self-referential mechanism of the question. The system collapses. The truth can never be spoken, because the very act of speaking the truth makes it false, and the act of declaring it false makes it true. This, of course, is a deep metaphor for how you approach the biggest decisions in your own life. How often do you demand certainty from a situation that is inherently built on fluidity and risk? You stand on the riverbank, metaphorically, trying to predict the outcome of your own commitment. You ask, if I truly commit to this path, this relationship, this career change, this belief system, will that commitment itself guarantee the desired result? You try to logically solve problems that are fundamentally emotional or probabilistic. You enter a self-referential loop. I will only be happy if I know I will be happy. And just like the mother, you become hostage to the framework. You become trapped not by reality, but by the conditional logic you impose upon reality. You are trying to predict the unpredictable effect of your own future action on your present state. You are demanding a guarantee from a universe that only trades in risk. The anxiety generated by the crocodile paradox is the anxiety of modern self-consciousness. The need to constantly monitor the authenticity of your own feelings, your intentions, and your trajectory. You become incapable of simply being because you are too busy trying to correctly predict what that being will ultimately produce. You become the paralyzed crocodile, incapable of action because the rule set demands impossible consistency. The profound philosophical insight, the refusal that liberates you from this impossible system, is simple. You have the right to refuse the question. The mother does not have to play the game. She can declare the conditional premise invalid. She can step outside the bounds of the self-referential logic and say, this question is ill-formed. It is designed to trap us both. I refuse to acknowledge the validity of a contract where truth and falsehood are functionally identical. This refusal is the highest act of intellectual sovereignty. When life presents you with a choice designed only to ensnare your intention, when you are forced to predict the outcome of your commitment before you even make the commitment, you must recognize the false premise. The path to freedom is realizing you are not obligated to answer questions that are mathematically certain to lead to meaninglessness. Some questions are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be walked away from. And in that moment of sovereign refusal, the crocodile's power dissolves. You don't have to define your trajectory for it to be real. You don't have to guarantee happiness for it to arrive. You simply stand up and walk away from the river, leaving the impossible question to drown in its own contradictory logic. The causal loop, the idea without origin. What if the most profound, life-altering truth you ever encountered wasn't something you learned, but something that was already waiting for you, destined to arrive at your specific coordinates in space-time? It's the unsettling feeling that you are merely the messenger for a message that possesses no sender, a universal wisdom whispered across a closed circuit. This is the challenge of the causal loop, or more specifically, the information loop, a temporal paradox where an idea sustains itself indefinitely without ever needing a genesis point. We tend to map reality as a straight line, demanding a beginning for every consequence, a source for every stream. The causal loop dismisses this linearity. Imagine a perfect, self-sustaining temporal circuit. You stumble upon a revolutionary concept, perhaps the cure for a specific kind of internal suffering. Driven by purpose, you manage to encode this knowledge and send it back to the precise moment in history that triggers its initial discovery. The person who discovers it, who is perhaps your past self, publishes it immediately. The knowledge then exists, influencing countless lives, including yours, leading eventually to your own rediscovery and subsequent transmission back through time. The question then becomes, who created the knowledge? When you trace the origin backwards, every point on the timeline points to a transmission event, never a moment of pure, uncaused invention. The answer is terrifying in its simplicity and scope. The idea originated nowhere. It always was. It is not an artifact of creation, but a fundamental truth discovered within an eternal loop. To truly grasp this, consider the concept of perfect knowledge, an insight so complete it fundamentally solves the human condition, eliminating the internal friction between what is and what should be. You struggle for decades, pouring your entire consciousness into this quest, finally achieving the profound breakthrough. You document it, and through means we can only imagine, you send this completed philosophy back 5 centuries to your intellectual progenitor. That ancestor, upon receiving the completed work, publishes it, launching the idea into the world, allowing it to percolate through history until it arrives at your own doorstep, where you feel the incredible weight of having finally discovered it. You only wrote the book because you read the book. The mechanism of this loop strips away the single narrative we rely upon for our identity, authorship. We crave the designation of pioneer, the claim that I struggled, I innovated, I birthed this world-altering idea from nothingness. But the causal loop suggests that genuine innovation is often just the moment we realize we are participating in a closed, self-sustaining system. When you receive the looped idea, you absolutely feel the profound urgency of creation. You experience the emotional struggle, the cognitive strain, the labor of delivery. But the loop reveals that the energy you expended was not genesis, it was maintenance. You were not the source, you were merely the most recent necessary conduit. The loop eliminates the cosmic need for a big bang of thought, implying that some truths don't need to be invented, only discovered and reliably transmitted in perpetuity. This is not reserved for theoretical physics. It mirrors how we feel about deep, universal maxims in our daily lives. When you finally grasp a truth, say, the paradoxical freedom found in accepting genuine helplessness or the necessity of radical self-forgiveness, it feels both completely revolutionary and utterly, impossibly familiar. Did you painstakingly learn that, or did the knowledge, having looped through the collective unconscious for millennia, simply find its way back to you? Modern life pressures us toward relentless, stressful originality, defining success by the unprecedented nature of our contribution. But perhaps the deepest, most necessary wisdom is simply the echo of the future arriving in the past, a truth that just keeps circulating. If the greatest ideas are truly looped, it offers a radical, liberating shift in psychological perspective. It frees us from the impossible burden of absolute genius. You don't have to be the original creator of the perfect solution. You only have to be the faithful custodian who ensures it gets safely sent forward or backward to its next necessary recipient. Meaning is found not in striving to draw the first line, but in ensuring the circle remains unbroken. This paradox tells us that sometimes the most original thing you can do is simply finish the circuit. And so, when you encounter that piece of profound, defining knowledge that snaps your world into sharp, focused clarity, ask yourself this: am I creating this idea right now, or am I completing the circle so that I might have been able to receive it in the first place? You are the cause of your own receiving. The grandfather paradox, integrating the past. Consider the moments you replay late at night, the failure, the regret, the missed opportunity, or the road not taken. You whisper a silent wish to go back and change it all, to edit the timeline, to remove the one glaring mistake that still dictates the terms of your present self. But ask yourself this: if you could truly sever the thread of your greatest past mistake, if you could erase the moment of profound failure, would the person who learned from that mistake, the person you are now sitting here contemplating the past, still exist? In science fiction and theoretical physics, this is known as the grandfather paradox. It's a classic logical loop demonstrating the catastrophic impossibility of retrocausality. If you eliminate your antecedent cause, you eliminate the subsequent effect, thereby making the initial causal action impossible. But we aren't discussing wormholes and tachyons. We are discussing the fundamental architecture of the self. The paradox's true existential weight lies in acknowledging that the foundation of your current resilience, your current compassion, your current wisdom, and even your current neuroses is built upon the very historical timeline you are tempted to reject. You must look at yourself not as a linear sequence of events, but as a meticulously woven, complex tapestry. Every thread, the vibrant successes, the long stretches of dull waiting, the knots of trauma, and the frayed edges of error, contributes to the whole image. If you take scissors and attempt to snip out a section you deem ugly, say, the thread representing the worst heartbreak or the most embarrassing failure, the entire neighboring structure immediately collapses. The surrounding colors lose their tension. The integrity of the present moment is instantly compromised. You cannot truly remove the struggle without simultaneously removing the specific kind of strength it was required to forge. This desire to perform temporal surgery on the self is the painful mechanism of self-rejection. We treat our past self as a stranger whose mistakes we must constantly correct, rather than an apprentice whose clumsy, sometimes costly attempts were absolutely necessary. The internal conflict arises because the ego desperately wants a streamlined, perfect origin story, free of awkwardness, vulnerability, and embarrassment. But existence insists on the messy, chaotic reality. The grandfather paradox reveals the profound irony of growth. To genuinely improve who you are, you must fully integrate, not surgically reject, who you were. The yearning to annihilate the past is the psychological equivalent of trying to step outside of the gravity well that holds you together. This tension plays out constantly in your current life. It manifests as chronic regret, a ceaseless mental time travel dedicated not to appreciating the journey, but to futilely rewriting the script. When you dwell relentlessly on what you should have done, you are attempting a conceptual, internal form of the grandfather paradox on yourself. You are seeking to erase the decisions that led you here, failing to realize that here is the only place you could have possibly acquired the clarity and wisdom required to make the better decision next time. The past is not a sentence you must serve. It is the necessary prerequisite for your current ability to choose. Recognizing this philosophical trap frees you from the exhausting burden of fictional self-correction. The philosophical impact is radical ownership. You stop seeing your past self as a series of errors to be overcome and start seeing it as a chain of necessary preconditions for your current complexity. Meaning is not found in the clean, straight lines of a sanitized history, but in the chaotic, interwoven lines of the history you actually lived. This integration transforms regret into profound acceptance and self-blame into foundational self-knowledge. You are the utterly inevitable culmination of every triumph and every wound. You cannot eliminate the shadows without eliminating the light they define. Your history is not a burden you carry. It is the fundamental structure that allows you to stand. The only functional way to move forward is to stop fighting the impossibility of changing the past, to turn back, shake hands with the flawed self that created you, and thank them for having the courage to make every single mistake that was required for you to finally arrive here. The past is immutable. The meaning you draw from it, however, is entirely your creation. Pinocchio's paradox: language and integrity. Have you ever tried so desperately to articulate a deeply held truth, a feeling, a commitment, a definitive vow, only to feel it instantly vanish the moment the words left your mouth? Why do we sense that the harder we try to define our own integrity, the more elusive that integrity becomes? Perhaps you've stood on a precipice of self-definition, asking, "Is this who I truly am?" Only to realize that the act of asking the question changes the answer. This profound philosophical trap, known academically as the liar paradox, finds its most accessible, heartbreaking form in the tale of a wooden boy whose nose grows when he tells a falsehood. Pinocchio is the physical manifestation of moral accountability, but his power is also his philosophical flaw. When we subject him to the logical stress test, when we ask, "What if Pinocchio says, 'My nose is about to grow'?" the entire structure of defined truth collapses. If his nose does grow, then his statement was true, which means he didn't lie, so his nose shouldn't have grown. If his nose doesn't grow, his statement was false, meaning he did lie, so his nose must grow. He is trapped in a loop of self-reference where the mechanism designed to enforce truth creates an undeniable falsehood. To understand the weight of this, imagine language as the only vessel available to carry reality. Reality is the infinite, dynamic ocean, and you are trying to scoop up one perfect, motionless cup of water. The moment you define the water, label it, categorize it, fix it in a sentence, you have arrested its movement. Language is necessary, but it acts like a filter, ensuring that the purest, most self-evident truths are precisely the ones that cannot pass through the gate without being fundamentally altered. Pinocchio is attempting to use the mechanism of definition, language, to define a condition, lying, that inherently breaks the definition. The paradox reveals the ultimate limitation, not of morality, but of logical consistency in describing human existence. We constantly make statements about ourselves meant to solidify our identities. I am a dedicated person. I will always prioritize this value. These statements are acts of linguistic integrity, but life by its nature demands adaptation. The moment your circumstances change, the rigidity of yesterday's perfect verbal commitment becomes today's hidden lie. You are trying to cement a living, breathing identity using verbal concrete. You are constantly building a prison of perfect definitions around a soul that demands flow and redefinition. Think about the tension you feel when you face cognitive dissonance. That pain is often the friction between the person you said you were and the person you are required to be right now. We expend vast emotional energy attempting to maintain verbal consistency, trying to keep our spoken narrative stable, instead of focusing on existential consistency, the alignment between our actions and our immediate internal convictions. The impact of realizing Pinocchio's paradox is profoundly liberating. It teaches you that true integrity is not the absence of internal conflict or linguistic paradox. It is the willingness to live within the contradiction. The goal is not to have a nose that never grows, because that would mean never truly pushing the boundaries of self-knowledge. The goal is to accept that the language you use to describe yourself your goals, your promises, your identity, is an imperfect, temporary tool. Meaning is not found in the perfect, unambiguous articulation of truth, because that articulation is often the lie. Meaning resides in the continuous, honest revision of the map, even if you have to tear up the pages you wrote yesterday. You must be willing to let go of the perfect story you told about yourself in favor of the messy, unpredictable reality of who you are becoming. The ultimate meaning, therefore, is found not in avoiding the lie, but in embracing the paradox that language is the beautiful, flawed vessel we use to build a temporary truth, a truth that requires constant, courageous demolition. Catch-22, the absurdity of the system. Have you ever tried to navigate a massive system, a corporation, a government body, a healthcare matrix, only to feel the chilling, slow realization that the rules are designed to fail you? Have you felt the cold, frustrating knot in your gut when logic simply dissolves under the weight of institutional mandate? That profound sense of existential futility, where the very act you must perform to prove your sanity is simultaneously the proof of your insanity, is the absolute heart of the Catch-22. It is the sound of the world telling you you can't win, because winning is defined as the proof that you didn't need to try. Catch-22, a term immortalized by Joseph Heller in his novel about the irrationality of warfare, is far more than just bureaucratic inconvenience. It is a logical trap. It describes a circular paradox where conflicting regulations or demands prevent the resolution of a dilemma. If you fulfill condition A, you inherently violate condition B, and fulfilling condition B requires you to reject A. In Heller's original framework, a wartime pilot could only be grounded if he was officially deemed insane. But crucially, the rule stated that asking to be grounded, expressing a rational desire to preserve one's life, was the ultimate, incontrovertible proof of sanity. Therefore, every pilot who asked to stop flying was, by definition, sane, and therefore forced to continue flying dangerous missions. It is the institutional mandate of absurdity. Consider the common, devastating paradox of modern professional life, the entry-level job. You need 2 years of established professional experience to get the job, yet you need the job itself to acquire the necessary experience. This is not a minor hurdle or a momentary miscommunication. It is a structural catch-22. It illustrates systemic gatekeeping where the criteria for access are inherently dependent on the resources that only access can provide. The system appears to be operating perfectly, with strict standards and clear requirements, yet it achieves nothing useful for the human element it supposedly serves. It forces you to recognize that the system's primary function is often self-justification and self-preservation, not logical service or human accommodation. The mechanism of Catch-22 requires one essential ingredient: a profound power disparity. This isn't a mere flaw in organizational logic. It is the intentional deployment of flawed logic by those in control. The deep insight here is recognizing that the absurdity isn't an accident. It is the very tool used to maintain institutional hierarchy. When logic fails, the only remaining tool for the subordinate is compliance, enforced by the very impossibility of arguing against the self-sealing structure. The immense tension arises when your internal sense of rational self-preservation clashes violently with the external, unyielding mandate. You find yourself trapped not by physical constraint or brute force, but by a neat, clean, self-referential loop of reasoning you cannot, by definition, untangle. We encounter modern micro-catch-22s daily, often in the most critical areas of our lives. Think about navigating complex insurance systems. You need the authorization for a necessary medical treatment before you can receive it. Yet the documentation proving the treatment's necessity can only be definitively obtained during the diagnostic process of that very treatment. Or consider the cruel mental health spiral. You are too paralyzed by depression or anxiety to seek the necessary help, but only successfully seeking help will alleviate the paralysis. These modern paradoxes steal your mental energy, erode your fundamental trust in the world's coherence, and deny you the validation that the necessary structures are governed by basic reason. The ultimate philosophical impact of confronting a catch-22 is the stark realization of the system's fundamental meaninglessness, or at least its indifference to human meaning. It forces you to acknowledge that your rational, striving self is often powerless against cold, self-justifying structures. This recognition can be deeply paralyzing, but only after it is deeply frightening. It strips away the illusion that the institution is guided by benevolent intent or even basic common sense. The psychological shift is one of necessity. When the rules are fundamentally absurd, the only way out is often an irrational, radical act of defiance or total, disaffected detachment. It pushes you toward an existential skepticism, realizing that sanity is often a construct defined and enforced by the very machine trying to crush your spirit. Catch-22 teaches us that freedom is not found by painstakingly succeeding within the impossible rules, but by recognizing the profound absurdity of the rules themselves. You are trapped by the system's logic until you realize that the system's logic is, for your self-preservation, entirely optional. The rule is simple. You are insane if you fly, and you are sane if you ask not to fly. But the unwritten existential rule, the one that grants true escape, is the one that says, if you genuinely understand the trap, you are already standing outside of it. Fermi's paradox, silence and meaning, the great silence, Fermi's paradox, and the weight of absence. We look up at the night sky, straining to hear a signal, a voice, a confirmation that we are not alone. You have invested so much energy into finding evidence that you are understood, that you are part of a larger, grand design. But what if the deepest truth is found not in the sound of a definitive message, but in the terrifying, echoing quality of the profound silence? This is the heart of Fermi's paradox. Developed by physicist Enrico Fermi, it asks a brutally simple question. If the universe is so vast, so old, and operates under uniform laws, where is everyone? Statistically, given the billions of stars and the high likelihood of Earth-like planets, the galaxy should be absolutely teeming with civilizations, some technologically advanced enough to have colonized the entire Milky Way in a fraction of its lifespan. Yet, when we tune in, when we listen to the radio spectrum and gaze into the depth of the cosmos, we hear nothing. The gap between probability and evidence is the paradox itself. It's not just a scientific curiosity, it's an existential crisis set against an unimaginable backdrop. It suggests a profound and uncomfortable truth about the nature of life, intelligence, and survival. Imagine standing on the shore of an endless dark ocean. You have built a small, precarious lighthouse, and you know, mathematically, logically, that there must be millions of other lighthouses flashing across this sea, established millennia ago. You stare intensely at the horizon, waiting for a single sweeping beam of light to finally confirm your assumptions. But the ocean remains utterly black. You are simultaneously certain that life must exist out there, and terrified by the realization that zero evidence is often the loudest possible signal. That oppressive absence starts to define your entire reality. The paradox, in its full existential force, presents two terrifying possibilities, often summarized by the great filter hypothesis. The filter is the obstacle, the challenge that prevents life from reaching the point of interstellar communication. If the filter is behind us, if the jump from inert matter to living cells or from single-celled life to complex consciousness was the nearly impossible, statistically improbable hurdle, then we are impossibly rare. We hold the winning lottery ticket. Our meaning, in this scenario, derives from our status as a biological miracle, a profound outlier that somehow beat the odds. But if the filter is ahead of us, if the obstacle is something inherent to advanced civilizations such as technological self-destruction, ecological collapse induced by rapid growth, or the emergence of synthetic plague, then the silence is not a sign of rarity, but a universal warning. The deeper you look into the silence, the clearer the potential future of your own meaninglessness becomes. The vastness of the universe is not waiting to greet us, it is waiting to swallow us. This cosmic paradox translates directly to your own relationships, ambitions, and spiritual seeking. You constantly search for confirmation, for a signal that your life matters, that your efforts resonate in the universal void. You send out signals, vulnerability, striving, love, artistic creation, and you crave an immediate, powerful, unambiguous response. But sometimes, life offers the great silence instead. The promotion doesn't materialize. The expected connection fades. The future you planned doesn't call back. You find yourself isolated, standing in the bright, focused light of your own effort, met only by the overwhelming cosmic quiet. The silence forces a necessary pivot. If there is no external validation, if the universe won't send you a text message confirming your inherent meaning, then that meaning must become an internal project. Fermi's paradox shifts the burden of proof onto your shoulders. The silence is the ultimate freedom because it dissolves the expectation of external approval. It transforms rarity, whether cosmic or personal, from a lonely anomaly into a profound, terrifying responsibility. You stop waiting for the cosmic phone to ring and start realizing that you are the only one who can decide what light you wish to build and what signal you must send across the dark sea. The meaning of the silence is not that we are alone in the universe, but that right now, in this singular, brief moment, we are the only voice we can be absolutely sure of. The paradox does not diminish us. It frames our fleeting existence as the most precious signal in a universe that desperately needs to hear something. Listen closely to the silence. It is demanding that you define your own signal. Zeno's paradox: action against analysis. We arrive now at Zeno's paradox, a conceptual trap designed not just to question the mechanism of motion, but to subtly paralyze the will. It is a brilliant, frustrating argument that exposes the limits of logic when applied to lived reality. Have you ever known exactly what you needed to do, write the chapter, start the business, have the difficult conversation, only to find yourself motionless, stuck forever in the space before the first step? That feeling of infinite proximity, yet impossible distance, is the true emotional meaning of the paradox in your life. Originating in ancient Greece, Zeno of Elea proposed several arguments, the most famous being the dichotomy paradox. To cross any room, you must first travel half the distance. Once you reach the midpoint, a new midpoint is immediately established and you must travel half of that remaining distance, and then half of that. Since any finite distance is composed of an infinite series of smaller halves, logic dictates that you can never truly complete the movement. You are perpetually arriving but never having arrived. You are always approaching zero yet never reaching it. Forget Achilles and the tortoise. Your modern tortoise is the relentless pursuit of perfection, the infinite loop of research and refinement before execution. You stand at the edge of the change you crave, but before you can start the novel, you must first outline every possible plot point. Before you launch the project, you must perfect the infrastructure down to the most minor detail. Before you can achieve, you must meticulously analyze the first half of the journey, then the next quarter, then the next eighth. You are building infinite conceptual scaffolding around the single, simple act of beginning. The tension here is exquisite. Zeno's logic is mathematically sound, yet undeniably false in the lived experience. You know you can walk across the room. The mechanism reveals that pure analysis, when applied to action, becomes self-defeating. When you break reality down into infinitely small pieces for inspection, you dissect the fundamental, cohesive quality of movement itself. The journey is not a summation of calculated halves. The journey is a unified, instantaneous whole. The problem isn't the distance. The problem is trusting a static analytical framework to describe a fundamentally dynamic process. You cannot understand flow by only looking at still images. In our era of hyperinformation, Zeno's trap is everywhere. Analysis paralysis has become the signature failure of the digital age. Every decision is split into 2, then 4, then 8 potential timelines that must be cross-referenced, evaluated, and mitigated against. Should I take the class now, or wait until the next session when I have more savings? Should I confront the problem directly, or find a passive, safer path. We become expert map makers, charting every micro step, only to realize that the map itself has become the obstacle. We are moving infinitely toward the starting line, convinced that the perfect 0 point, the absolutely rational moment to begin, exists. The profound shift comes when you realize that Zeno's paradox is solved not by the brain, but by the body. The intellect seeks to atomize the journey into separate, measurable units. The physical act of walking simply synthesizes the halves. You don't consciously calculate the midpoint of the midpoint, you just move. Meaning is not found in the intellectual mastery of the process. It requires the simple, blind faith in continuity. The solution to infinite analysis is the finite, immediate commitment. You are required to step past the threshold of certainty and into the realm of action, where logic fails and reality prevails. The moment you start, the infinite halves collapse into a single, undeniable trajectory. This is the final essential lesson of Zeno. Meaning is not found in the elegant proof that movement is impossible. Meaning is found in the ugly, imperfect, illogical step that proves movement is real. Stop standing at the threshold of infinity, calculating whether or not you can ever reach the end. Take the first step, knowing that the only way to solve the analysis is to burn the chart. The Sorites paradox, gradual change. You look in the mirror today and you see the same person you were yesterday. You feel the same inertia, the same anxieties, the same fundamental flaws lingering in the background of your consciousness. You read the same books, you attempt the same habits, you push the same stone up the same hill. If growth is real, why does the scale not tip? If change is happening, why is there no defining moment of transformation? When do you suddenly realize that the old you finally dissolved and a new identity began? This is the tyranny of the margin, encapsulated by the Sorites paradox, or the paradox of the heap. It is deceptively simple and devastatingly relevant to the lived experience of modern existence. If 1,000 grains of sand make a heap, does 999 still constitute a heap? Logically, yes. If we proceed by removing one single, individually insignificant grain, we are compelled to keep answering yes, until we arrive at 0 grains, which is clearly not a heap. But where exactly did the heap disappear? Where was the moment of rupture, the definable threshold when one state transitioned into its opposite? The Sorites paradox exposes the fundamental tension between our quantitative efforts and our qualitative understanding of reality. We demand precision in a world defined by continuous flows and vague boundaries. We are creatures of threshold, desperately needing markers and signposts. The sobriety date, the promotion announcement, the moment we finally felt healed. But the paradox shows us that these defining moments are often retrospective illusions, artificial boundaries we impose on a chaotic continuum of effort. Consider the metaphor of the fading photograph. A century ago, a picture of your great-grandparent was developed. You look at it today. It is crisp, clear. You expose it to natural light for a fraction of a second, repeating this action every morning for a year. The individual exposure is too minuscule to register. You cannot point to any single day where the photograph became visibly faded. Yet after those 365 exposures, the image is unquestionably ruined. The change has occurred entirely in the margins through accumulated efforts that were individually too small to matter, but collectively too large to ignore. The anxiety that Sorites provokes lies precisely in its denial of clear thresholds. If every single choice you make is individually insignificant, if one skipped workout or one instance of procrastination makes no measurable difference, how do you trust that the collection of them will create significance? How do you justify the effort of dropping one small grain of sand when the heap still stands firm? The mechanism of the paradox reveals our continuous identity. We are always simultaneously becoming and remaining. The vagueness ensures that the transformation occurs not through a dramatic pivot, but through the insidious erosion of the former self. Think about slow burnout, the existential fatigue that defines so much of the modern professional experience. You didn't wake up one morning completely broken. It was one ignored boundary, one extra hour spent answering emails, one habit sacrificed, grains of sand removed daily, indiscernibly. You couldn't point to any specific Tuesday, March 12th, as the day your spirit broke. You just realized, sometime around December, that the person holding the shovel wasn't you anymore. The self that you thought was robust and defined had simply been eroded. The freedom granted by the Sorites paradox is the liberation from needing an endpoint definition. If the line is always blurred, then your current state is always temporary, always under profound revision. You don't have to wait for the label, successful, healed, in love, to validate the grain of sand you dropped today. The paradox forces us to recognize that the reality we inhabit and the meaning we crave is built not by leaps of faith, but by imperceptible tremors. It dissolves the artificial tension between the person you are now and the person you are trying to be, revealing them as one continuous, often messy, narrative where the margin is everything. You cannot see the line where one world ends and the next begins. You cannot define the moment you stopped being the old self and started being the new. But every morning, you must drop the grain of sand, or you must refuse to put one back, trusting that the heap one day will simply not be there. That is how we navigate the meaningless chaos of daily repetition and rebuild the meaning we thought was lost, one insignificant, indispensable step at a time. The paradox of hedonism, meaning before pleasure. Why is it that the moment you declare with absolute certainty, "I must be happy now," happiness seems to retreat, becoming a ghost just beyond the edge of your perception? Why does the relief you seek from immediate comfort, the instantaneous gratification, the perfect purchase, the quick escape, leave you feeling fundamentally emptier just moments later? We live in a world optimized for the instant elimination of discomfort, yet we are arguably more profoundly uneasy than ever before. This is the central, agonizing truth known as the paradox of hedonism. Hedonism, in its purest form, posits that the fundamental good in life is the maximization of pleasure and the minimization of pain. This principle seems intuitively obvious. Why wouldn't we want to feel good all the time? But for centuries, philosophers, from Socrates to John Stuart Mill, recognized a fatal flaw in this logic. When pleasure becomes the direct object of your pursuit, it transforms from a delightful state of being into a demanding taskmaster. The relentless focus on feeling good is exactly what prevents you from ever experiencing a deep sense of being good. Imagine you are standing in a field searching for a magnificent rainbow. You bring a powerful spotlight to aid your vision. The rainbow is a phenomenon of refraction. It appears only when the light is shining away from you, passing through moisture in the atmosphere. If you turn the powerful spotlight directly onto the rainbow, or worse, directly onto your own eyes, the delicate interplay of light is ruined. The rainbow vanishes. Happiness, or true sustained joy, works exactly like the rainbow. It is not the light source itself. It is the ephemeral, beautiful byproduct of light being correctly aimed at something else, something external, challenging, and meaningful. Happiness is the phenomenon of peripheral vision. You only notice it when you are diligently looking at something other than the search for happiness itself. The mechanism of this paradox lies in two biological and psychological forces: adaptation and scarcity. We are wired for hedonic adaptation, the hedonic treadmill, which requires ever-increasing stimulation to maintain the same baseline level of pleasure. The comfort you derive from the dopamine hit of immediate gratification is extremely short-lived, demanding a higher dose next time. This pursuit is inherently inflationary, leading to burnout and dissatisfaction. Furthermore, direct pleasure is often a consumption activity. It is self-centered. What do I want? What can I acquire? How can I feel better right now? Fulfillment, however, operates on a completely different axis. It is built on self-transcendence, requiring you to ask, what does the world demand of me? Where am I needed? What pain am I willing to endure for a larger purpose? We see this conflict vividly played out in modern life. The technologies we use, the endless scrolling, the instant deliveries, the binge consumption, are all hyper-efficient pleasure delivery systems designed to bypass the necessity of meaning. They offer immediate escape, promising a frictionless existence, but they deliver spiritual and psychological stagnation. We have optimized our lives for ease, forgetting that friction is not the enemy of joy. Friction, in the service of a goal you value, is precisely where value is generated. This paradox forces us to confront a vital psychological truth. Human flourishing, or eudaimonia, is not about maximum comfort, but about maximum contribution. The capacity for deep, enduring contentment requires the conscious acceptance of necessary suffering, the discomfort of sustained effort, the struggle of mastering a skill, the boredom required for genuine reflection. The deepest, most enduring narcotic available to the human mind is not immediate pleasure, but the profound, resonant feeling of being needed by a cause or a person larger than oneself. If you chase pleasure directly, you are chasing a shadow that vanishes the moment you try to grasp it. True joy is not found after the struggle or outside the difficulty. It is found in the struggle, when that struggle is in service of something you define as profound and necessary. Stop chasing the shadow. Start building the substance. The sun will rise and the shadow will appear behind you, exactly where it belongs. The sword and the shield, overcoming absolutes. We spend so much energy trying to be purely one thing, unwavering, protected, or absolutely certain. We seek the existential clarity that simplifies the world into distinct categories, good or bad, strength or vulnerability, the moment of rest or the moment of decisive action. But what if the moment you choose one absolute certainty is the precise moment you sacrifice reality itself? This is the dilemma of the sword and the shield, the illusion of moral purity. We crave absolutes because complexity is terrifying. We want a world where the sword is always righteous and the shield is always a pure, unblemished protection against all harm. This desire to eliminate necessary friction is the origin of many deep, modern crises. The belief that strength and vulnerability cannot coexist, or that kindness and necessary disciplined aggression must be mutually exclusive parts of your character. You become defined by the exhausting internal battle to eliminate one side of the human equation. Consider the classic hero narrative, or perhaps just the narrative you construct for yourself every morning. You believe you must choose to be the perfect, stainless shield of justice, absorbing all impact without retaliation, or to be the ruthless, uncompromising sword of necessary efficiency, always cutting away the unnecessary. But look closer at anyone you truly admire, or even the periods of your own life when you felt most grounded. They were rarely defined by purity of action or motive. They were defined by the tension between necessary severity and disciplined compassion. Imagine standing on a metaphorical battlefield, which is simply life moving forward. If you only possess the shield, you become immovable. You survive but never move forward, unable to enforce boundaries or make painful, essential changes. If you only possess the sword, you inflict wounds and enforce your will, but you remain fatally exposed to the feedback and pain of the external world, lacking true internal resilience. To survive the deep existential conflict, the paradox of being a conscious, evolving human, you need both hands working together, recognizing the utility and danger of each. The real tension arises because we confuse the tool with the identity. You are not the sword, and you are not the shield. You are the wielder. The moment you insist on being 100% good, 100% open, or 100% resilient, you have outsourced your complex, messy humanity to a simplistic absolute. You have abdicated the responsibility of choice. The paradox you must overcome is this. True strength is not the ability to resist pain, the shield, but the willingness to use your power even when it means causing discomfort, the sword, often to yourself or to unsustainable, stagnant situations. The ultimate absolute you must discard is the belief that conflict or difficult choices always equal personal failure. Sometimes the conflict is the necessary evolution. Think about your relationships, your professional life, or even your creative pursuits. How often do you paralyze yourself trying to maintain a perfect, harmless exterior, the immaculate, flawless shield? You fear setting clear, decisive boundaries, the necessary sword, because you believe it violates your self-identity as a good person or a flexible coworker or a loving partner. You believe that if you show necessary assertiveness, you automatically forfeit your right to claim compassion. This forced separation, this obsessive quest for moral or emotional purity, is unbelievably exhausting. It leads inevitably to passive aggression, internal resentment, and ultimately, deep emotional burnout. You cannot be truly present, authentic, or sustainably useful if you are constantly editing your existence and actions to fit a non-paradoxical, simplistic ideal. That ideal simply does not exist. When you finally accept that the shield is meaningless without the capacity of the sword, and that the sword is monstrous without the discretion of the shield, you move sharply from absolute thinking to contextual wisdom. The internal philosophical question shifts entirely. It moves from, am I good or bad, to, what wisdom, boundary, or action is required in this moment, and what is its cost? This integration, the synthesis of offense and defense, creates genuine adaptive resilience. It frees you from the tyranny of consistency and the need for external validation. You realize that your capacity for necessary severity is precisely what protects your capacity for genuine tenderness and joy. You are no longer trying to eliminate the shadows. You are learning how to control the light they create, accepting that shadows are the inevitable result of illumination. The sword and the shield are not opposites to be chosen, but essential necessary postures to be mastered. They teach you that the most meaningful, honest life is not lived in purity, but in dynamic, difficult, and essential balance. The true power is found in the hand that knows how to wield both, and perhaps most importantly, the wisdom of when to finally put them down. Halfway. If you're still awake, it means you were meant to be here. Subscribe and keep walking this quiet path with us. Simpson's paradox, the hidden variable. You trust the numbers. You trust the data. You look at the grand statistical reports of society, of success, of happiness, and you attempt to place your own life within those perfect aggregated trend lines. But what if the conclusion that makes perfect, elegant sense, the one that drives public policy or dictates your definition of winning, is actually the opposite of the truth? What if meaning is only visible when you shatter the world back into its smallest, most inconvenient pieces? This is Simpson's paradox, the hidden variable. It is a fundamental statistical phenomenon that proves how aggregation can systematically lie to you. The paradox occurs when a trend appears consistently in several different groups of data, but that trend disappears or entirely reverses when those groups are combined. It is the mathematical proof that context is not just helpful but absolutely mandatory for truth. When you look at the combined data, you see a clear victory for one choice. You see, for example, that University A admits a higher percentage of applicants than University B, but then you segment the data. You look only at the applicants applying to the humanities track, and you find University B admits more. You look only at the applicants applying to the sciences track, and again, University B admits more. How can University A win overall, yet lose in every single category? This is the tyranny of the hidden variable. In the university example, the hidden variable is often the ratio of applicants to the competitive tracks. University A might have received far fewer applications overall, or maybe the majority of its applicants aimed for the easiest, least competitive programs. They achieved the higher overall success rate not by being better, but by having an easier pool to select from. The illusion of superiority is built entirely upon where the bulk of the easier cases were placed. The mechanism is disarmingly simple, yet devastating when applied to life. We live in an aggregated world. We are constantly comparing ourselves to the overall average. Average wealth, average productivity, average happiness. But the overall average is a statistical phantom, almost always skewed by hidden confounding variables that we refuse to acknowledge. Think about career success. You see someone who achieves tremendous velocity early in their life. You compare your own sluggish trajectory to theirs and conclude you are failing. But you are comparing your personal data, collected under the constraints of immediate financial need and self-funding, to their aggregated success, which might contain the hidden variable of multi-generational inherited safety net. They were operating in a statistical subgroup that you are not in. They were given the statistical equivalent of mild kidney stones while you are battling the severe. Simpson's paradox reveals why narratives of meritocracy can feel fundamentally dishonest. If the overwhelming trend is that people from certain backgrounds succeed more often, the general conclusion is often that those people are inherently better or more capable. The truth, revealed only when we painstakingly segment the data, is that the system consistently and overwhelmingly allocated them the easiest challenges and the fewest variables to control. Their apparent success rate is inflated because their circumstances, the very structure of the game, was less aggressive. This forces a vital internal shift, meaning success and even personal value cannot be measured against the general statistical average. You must abandon the temptation to look only at the overall scoreboard. To find meaning, you must stop aggregating your life. You must force yourself to identify the lurking variable, the unacknowledged context, the unique disadvantage, the privilege that was never earned, that governs the trends you are observing. The statistical illusion disappears the moment you ask the painful question, what category does this person belong to that I do not? When you see a general trend that suggests your personal efforts are futile, the solution is not to try harder against the tide of the aggregate. The solution is radical segmentation. Break the world into smaller, more truthful pieces until the lying average finally disappears. The ultimate truth is hidden in the inconvenient subgroups. The universe doesn't deal in tidy averages. It deals only in specific, complex cases. Your meaning is not in the aggregate. It is precisely in the variable they forgot to measure. That variable is your context. The Barber paradox, the principle of self-application. We often seek coherence in our lives, a perfect system of rules and definitions that explains who we are and why we act. We are told to know ourselves, to define our purpose, to craft the narrative. But what happens when the very instrument you use to define the self is the self? What if the act of knowing yourself makes the self fundamentally unknowable? This is the principle of self-application, best illustrated by Bertrand Russell's classic logical crisis, the Barber paradox. This isn't about shaving, though the setting is deceptively simple. Imagine a small, hypothetical Spanish town governed by a very specific law regarding hygiene. There is one barber, and he operates under a singular, absolute mandate. The barber shaves all and only those men in the town who do not shave themselves. Pause for a moment and consider the set being defined. The barber is the central element of the set, and his job is to operate exclusively on the set of men who are outside the self-shaving category. It sounds perfectly logical until you try to apply the rule to the man who created it. Who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, he immediately violates his own rule. Why? Because the rule states he must only shave those who do not shave themselves. By shaving himself, he moves out of the required category and therefore cannot shave himself. Conversely, if the barber does not shave himself, then according to his own rule, which states that the barber must shave everyone who doesn't shave themselves, he must be shaved by the barber. The logic collapses. The paradox reveals that the concept of the barber, the person whose job is defined entirely by who he excludes from the self-shaving group, is an entity that cannot logically exist within the boundaries of its own definition. The rule eats itself. The set defined by the condition cannot contain itself. Why does this matter outside the realm of formal logic? Because you are constantly trying to be the barber of your own soul. You are constantly trying to define the self, to categorize your behaviors, to establish your boundaries, and to create the perfect internal system that corrects its own flaws. You look inward, attempting to apply a critical, objective lens to your own subjectivity. You try to be the system that fixes the system. This self-application is where existential tension arises. The moment you declare, "I am someone who never procrastinates," or "I am someone who is free from self-doubt," you create a boundary. But who is the I that is making that declaration? If you attempt to place that defining I inside the category vanishes. If you attempt to place it outside, it is no longer truly yours. The attempt at absolute self-mastery, the drive to be completely transparent to yourself, to have no unshaven corners of your personality, is a logically doomed endeavor. We pursue self-knowledge as if it were a stable, objective thing we could catch, define, and catalog. But the paradox of self-application shows that the self doing the defining is changed by the definition it creates. The observer and the observed are the same entity, perpetually shifting the boundaries the moment they are drawn. The pursuit of a final, coherent self is the pursuit of a logical impossibility. The psychological impact of embracing the Barber paradox is profound freedom. It relieves you of the burden of final coherence. You realize that you cannot step outside yourself to shave away every flaw or to perfectly categorize every desire. Your existence requires an inherent, persistent level of ambiguity. Meaning doesn't come from solving the paradox of who you are, but from living comfortably inside the contradiction. The system must always have an element of the unshaved, the uncontrolled, the undefined, because that ambiguity is the only thing that proves the system is alive. We must acknowledge that the hand holding the razor can never truly shave the hand that holds it. Stop trying to find the perfect definition, and realize that the only true self is the one that accepts its own impossible geometry. You are the set that cannot contain itself, and that instability is the only real foundation you have. The paradox of thrift, thinking the system. You spend your life building walls to keep yourself safe. You practice vigilance, minimize risk, and try to maximize your reserves, be they financial, emotional, or social. But what if the very act of building your personal security is what starves the world outside, eventually weakening the ground beneath your own foundations? What if the most prudent thing for you to do individually is the most disastrous thing for everyone else, including the future version of yourself? The concept originates in the sobering world of macroeconomics. It is called the paradox of thrift. It describes a phenomenon where, in times of fear, every rational person decides to save their money. They halt consumption. They hoard resources. They prioritize the creation of a maximal personal buffer. This decision is, undeniably, prudent for you, the individual actor, who sees an uncertain future and conserves against it. But when everyone simultaneously adopts this attitude of intense conservation, the aggregate effect is a cessation of flow. The economy stalls, demand collapses, jobs are lost, and the collective crisis deepens. Your individual act of calculated prudence becomes the catalyst for the social catastrophe that eventually reaches through your own locked door, proving your initial fear of instability correct. You created the necessity for the thrift you practiced. Imagine a small village preparing for a harsh winter. Every family, acting purely in self-interest and paranoia, decides to hoard their seed grain instead of planting the full field required to sustain them all. "I must secure my future. I cannot trust the harvest," says the farmer, locking the granary door. In isolation, he feels smart. He has the largest reserve, but spring arrives, and because no one planted enough, the collective harvest fails catastrophically. The farmer who hoarded the most grain is now materially safe, but he is surrounded by the desperation, scarcity, and potential violence that he helped engineer. His security is temporary, fragile, and utterly dependent on the poverty of his now unstable environment. The tension lies in the scale of our vision. We are fundamentally wired for individual optimization, driven by survival instincts that shout, "Protect your own." We are taught that self-sufficiency is the highest virtue, the ultimate freedom. But the paradox of thrift tells us that true independence is a destructive myth. It requires a functioning, interdependent ecosystem. We trade the short-term, immediate safety of isolation for the long-term fragility of a starved community. This dynamic extends far beyond money. Consider the realm of emotional energy. You decide to stop investing in vulnerable relationships, practicing emotional thrift, because you were hurt once, because you saw a risk and withdrew your funds. You save your sensitivity, your time, your commitment. You become emotionally wealthy, in theory, boasting a high reserve of protected energy. But the human system is designed for reciprocal expenditure. The stored love begins to stagnate, the potential connections atrophy, the community around you, friends, family, partners, sensing the withdrawal, begins to conserve their own vulnerability too. The collective emotional economy shrinks, resulting in widespread isolation, which you, despite your full emotional bank, now experience profoundly. Your thrift led to your loneliness. Look at how this plays out in modern social dynamics. We hoard attention. We save our authentic opinions for the most private groups. We maximize our digital profile's signal-to-noise ratio, investing only where guaranteed return, likes, validation, is present. We are all diligently maximizing our personal brand security, practicing the digital paradox of thrift. But the result is a public sphere starved of genuine connection, intellectual risk, and shared, imperfect humanity. We live in a world of individually optimized fortresses floating in an ocean of collective distrust and engineered distance. Recognizing this paradox forces a radical and necessary shift in how you define control. Control is not the accumulation of a personal buffer against the system. True resilience is the painful recognition that you are the system. Your security is not ultimately measured by the size of your savings account, be it money, energy, or patience, but by the health and vitality of the ecosystem you contribute to. The shift is agonizing because it demands that you risk spending your reserves, knowing that the only way to collectively generate more wealth, more love, or more trust is through generous, vulnerable action. It asks you to act, sometimes, against your most primal protective instincts, for the good of a future you cannot guarantee but must invest in. The great paradox of existence is that to truly gain, you must be willing to spend. Stop hoarding the light inside your chest, fearing the darkness outside. The only real safety you will ever know is the one built by illuminating the world around you, even if it feels like a painful expenditure of self. The paradox of stability, controlled risk. You spend your life building walls, meticulously reinforcing your defenses against the chaos you perceive outside. Your deepest, most instinctive desire is for permanence, the unshakable certainty that tomorrow will look exactly like today. But what if the strongest foundation is not the one that never moves, but the one that allows itself to be tested? What if the relentless avoidance of small pain and minor failure is, in fact, the ultimate vulnerability? This is the central tenet of controlled risk, a paradox that challenges the common definition of what it means to be stable. We naturally equate stability with stasis, with systems that are frozen in time, protected from change. Yet, across all complex systems, biological, economic, psychological, true resilience is achieved not by eliminating risk entirely, but by internalizing and managing manageable doses of instability. A system that never adapts eventually becomes so fragile that when the inevitable, large shock hits, it breaks completely and catastrophically. Consider the metaphor of the controlled burn in a mature forest. A forest fire is undeniably a risk, a destructive force. But seasoned ecologists know that suppressing every small natural fire eventually leads to a disastrous buildup of decades of highly flammable underbrush and debris, existential tinder. When the inevitable major wildfire arrives, fueled by this accumulated material, the ensuing inferno is unstoppable, destroying the entire ecosystem. The controlled small burn, performed intentionally and strategically, is the necessary instability, the calculated risk, that prevents overwhelming disaster and ensures the long-term health and stability of the whole. Now, apply this mechanism to your own life. You seek a predictable, stable routine. You avoid uncomfortable confrontations, shy away from intense physical strain, or choose the familiar career path instead of the challenging leap. You feel secure, but this security is deceptive. It is merely the accumulation of existential tinder. You are not building stability, you are cultivating fragility. When the market shifts, when a loved one demands painful honesty, or when genuine illness strikes, your untested interior collapses. You lack the necessary muscle memory for recovery because you denied yourself the minor exercises in repair. The paradox reveals itself. Absolute safety is the most dangerous risk of all because it systematically removes the capacity to adapt. We see this amplified in the modern world. We construct cognitive bunkers, seeking out digital and social echo chambers, stable belief systems, where our views are never challenged. We feel affirmed and stable within these walls. But when reality, or a genuinely opposing viewpoint, breaches that fortress, we don't engage in reasoned debate, we fracture. We don't have the mental resilience to integrate complexity. The controlled risk is the intellectual sparring, the willingness to fail small in a public argument or admit fault in a minor relationship, ensuring that your core self is robust enough to handle genuine, high-stakes crises. The psychological implication of this paradox is profound. It fundamentally redefines how we approach success and failure. Success is often framed as the elimination of problems. But controlled risk teaches us that our greatest strength lies not in the absence of problems, but in the developed capacity to solve increasingly complex ones. Stability is not the state of being unbroken. It is the iterative process of self-correction, of healing and hardening the seams where the breaks occurred. It is the difference between a fragile, perfectly preserved historical artifact and a living organism, continually shedding old layers and regrowing stronger material after every necessary exposure to the elements. You must consciously choose your landscape. You can live within the illusion of zero risk, awaiting the catastrophic, overwhelming event you have rendered yourself unable to withstand. Or you can embrace the minor tremors, the intentional, controlled burn of conscious, recoverable failure, knowing that the true and enduring cost of stability is the periodic, necessary instability of change. The fortress that never opens its gates eventually starves its own garrison. Olbers' paradox, the revealing darkness. The ultimate fear of existence is that the universe is too big, too indifferent, and too uniform for your personal flicker of consciousness to matter. You worry that if everything is possible, nothing is special. But what if the greatest truth about meaning is revealed not by infinite light, but by essential darkness? This is the revelation hidden within Olbers' paradox. You look up at the night sky. In that profound silence, does the scattered light truly carry the weight of existence, or is it the overwhelming blackness that holds the secrets? It is the darkness that feels more informative, more absolute. This cosmic intuition was formalized in the early 19th century by the German astronomer Heinrich Olbers, forcing us to confront a deceptively simple question that shattered the assumption of an infinite, eternal cosmos. If the universe is endless and uniformly populated with stars, why is the night sky dark? If the cosmos stretched infinitely in every direction, every single line of sight you traced outward would eventually terminate on the surface of a star. The aggregate light of all those stars, regardless of distance, would mean the entire sky, night and day, should be blindingly, uniformly brilliant. There should be no black gaps, no shadows, no place for a constellation to hide. The celestial sphere should be a furnace of endless white light. Yet, we see blackness, we see night. To grasp the severity of this cosmic expectation versus our reality, conduct a mental experiment. Imagine yourself standing in a dense, primeval forest that stretches out forever. If the forest truly had no boundary, no matter where you turned your head, your vision would eventually hit a tree trunk. Your entire field of view would be solid wood. You would see no sky, no horizon, only the encompassing brown texture of trunks. Olbers asked why, when the universe is theoretically that endless forest of stars, We stand in overwhelming clarity, surrounded by quiet, cold blackness. This darkness is not an absence, but information. The failure of the light to overwhelm us is proof that our assumptions about reality were fundamentally flawed. The darkness reveals boundaries, limits, and movement. It tells us that the universe is not infinitely old, meaning the light from the most distant sources has simply not had enough time to reach us. It tells us the universe is not static, but expanding, stretching the wavelength of light from distant galaxies until that visible light is redshifted out of existence, turning intense brilliance into cold invisibility. The darkness is the effect of structure, time, and motion. It is the signature of a beginning and the evidence of boundaries. Now bring this paradox inside yourself. You live in a world of purported infinite content, infinite connection, infinite possibility. We are told we must strive for uniform, persistent light, a perpetual state of fulfillment, happiness, and meaning. If meaning were uniformly distributed across all experience, if your life were truly endless and filled with uniformly shining stars of potential, shouldn't your soul feel constantly illuminated, vibrant, and whole? Yet, you feel the profound internal night. You encounter the void. You experience periods of deep, suffocating meaninglessness. We fear this internal darkness, assuming it is proof of failure, a flaw in our wiring, or an absence of true value. But just as the darkness of the night sky is proof of the universe's boundaries, your personal feeling of emptiness is proof that your capacity for meaning is not infinitely uniform, and that your life is a structured, bounded, moving journey. Your darkness is not a lack of light, it is the condition necessary for the light to be seen. If the sky were uniformly bright, there would be no constellations, no ability to navigate, no sense of awe, no specific points of focus. The blackness is what frames the singular, localized, precious spark of truth you manage to generate. What changes within you is the acceptance that limits create significance. It is because the light is finite, because your time is bounded, because your universe is expanding, that those rare moments of connection, creation, and clarity become so brilliantly visible against the vast, cold backdrop. The meaninglessness you fear is simply the necessary frame, the cosmic black velvet upon which the stars of your true life are finally revealed. The ultimate truth is found not in the search for the overwhelming, uniform light of supposed infinite meaning, but in treasuring the specific, localized, and precious spark that successfully resists the consuming darkness. Do not mourn the night sky. Embrace it. It is the defining feature of your unique existence. The dilemma of free will, the burden of total agency. We are often told that the goal of human existence is to maximize freedom, to tear down every fence and sever every constraint that binds the self. The narrative of progress champions the severing of dependencies from nature, from tradition, from inherited destiny. But what if the absence of limitations is not the ultimate liberation we seek, but the heaviest shackle we could forge for ourselves? What if the true anxiety of modern life stems not from the chains we cannot break, but from the unbearable, paralyzing terror of infinite choices we must eternally face? Consider this quiet dread that settles when the world goes silent. If you truly could do anything, if every potential outcome was solely and entirely dependent on your raw, unconditioned will, would that feel like divine power, or would it feel like unbearable cosmic loneliness? We are discussing the moment the existential pursuit of absolute autonomy collapses into the cold reality of absolute, unshareable responsibility. Total agency is the theoretical state where the self is the sole originating cause of all its actions, unconstrained by nature, society, culture, or past causality. It is the core philosophical recognition that existence precedes essence, that you are not born with a predetermined definition, purpose, or role. You arrive as a blank slate, and you must will yourself into being, moment by moment, decision by decision. The universe offers no mandated destiny, no inherent moral guideposts, only a terrifying, endless, raw possibility. This concept is intoxicating and empowering when studied in theory, but devastating when applied to the urgent necessity of simply living your life. To truly grasp the weight of this burden, imagine yourself standing in a boundless, featureless white room. There is no gravity, no air resistance, no color, no measurable distance, only pure, homogeneous potentiality. You are the sole architect. If you wish to move, you must invent friction. If you wish to draw a line, you must invent coordinates and boundaries. You realize quickly that to do anything meaningful, you first have to impose arbitrary limits. A choice, by definition, is only meaningful when something else is excluded. If every path is open and equally valid, you cease to walk. You merely drift, paralyzed by parity. Total agency is that white room, a universe so free it is functionally inert until you volunteer for restriction. The mechanism of the burden operates through a devastating amplification of consequence. When you recognize total agency, every failed relationship, every unwritten book, every mediocre Tuesday is not the fault of circumstance, destiny, or bad luck. It is purely, inescapably, your own fabrication. The internal conflict shifts radically from the empowering question, "What can I do?" to the paralyzing question, "What must I choose out of an infinity of options?" Knowing that whatever I do, I immediately negate everything else I could have been. The tension builds because true freedom requires you to justify the universe, your universe, not just your momentary actions within it. When nothing is necessitated by external fate, everything must be eternally justified by internal will. This isn't just abstract philosophy, it is the constant, high-frequency hum of modern decision fatigue. We live in a society built upon maximizing individual agency, unlimited majors, endless streams of global content, the constant pressure to pivot careers, to optimize every measurable aspect of life. This infrastructure of supposed freedom constantly pushes the burden back onto the individual. Why are you unhappy? Because you haven't chosen happiness aggressively enough. Why are you dissatisfied? Because you didn't successfully optimize your lifestyle, your career path, or your internal emotional state. The culture celebrates the unlimited self, but it never acknowledges that this celebration is really just the handing over of a cosmic bill marked payable in full responsibility. The psychological impact is clear. We find meaning not in the pure, abstract concept of freedom, but in the necessary constraints we choose, or those that deeply choose us. Love, duty, vocation, commitment, shared faith. These are not merely limitations we tolerate. They are the structural boundaries we desperately erect to give our actions weight and direction. They narrow the infinite white room down to a defined, navigable path. Paradoxically, only when we accept a set of non-negotiable boundaries, a structure of oughts, do our cans finally stop paralyzing us and begin to matter. It is the acceptance of a boundary that defines the horizon toward which you can actually walk. The truest freedom, then, is not the infinite availability of options, but the courage to impose profound, intentional limits upon yourself. The burden of total agency teaches us the terrifying, necessary truth that you must choose your chains wisely. For those self-imposed restrictions are the only things that truly set you free. The ultimate paradox is that meaning is not found in freedom from constraints, but in the profound, courageous act of choosing which constraints you will serve. The paradox of tolerance. When openness must close the door, you carry this ideal, this banner of pure, limitless openness. You believe that understanding every perspective, granting space to every voice, is the highest measure of your integrity and intellect. But what happens when the very mechanism of your kindness is weaponized and used to destroy the system that allows you to be kind in the first place? We call this Popper's dilemma, a challenge to the moral high ground. The paradox of tolerance. You believe in dialogue, in unconditional inclusion, in letting all ideologies speak their piece. That, you are taught, is the mark of a sophisticated mind and a healthy society. Yet somewhere deep down, an alarming thought surfaces. You know that certain words, certain philosophies, carry a poison that seeks not to coexist, but to conquer. When does being truly good demand that you be selectively severe? When does the duty to remain open require you to finally close the door? This concept, formalized by philosopher Karl Popper in the wake of fascism, strikes at the heart of our most cherished democratic and personal values. Tolerance is the foundation of freedom. It allows competing truths and differing identities to breathe. But Popper observed that tolerance is not a passive, infinite resource. It has a boundary, a critical firewall. If a society extends tolerance to those who explicitly advocate for the elimination of tolerance, if you patiently listen to the argument for silencing all future arguments, you are simply signing the warrant for your own annihilation. The tolerant person, paradoxically, must reserve the right not to tolerate intolerance. To understand the weight of this decision, imagine you are the curator of a delicate ecosystem, a greenhouse dedicated to diverse, fragile life. Your core rule is total inclusion. You allow every plant, every insect, every type of soil to flourish. This is your virtue. But then, a distinct parasite enters, not seeking space, but seeking total dominion. It is designed specifically to kill the very diversity that nurtured its entry. Do you stand by and watch the wholesale destruction in the name of your initial, absolute rule of inclusion, or do you intervene? Your inaction, born of radical, pure tolerance, becomes the most profound act of intolerance towards the future health of the system you sought to protect. This is where the emotional tension flares. The paradox lies in the required sacrifice of a moral absolute. You desperately want to be the person who hears everyone out, the person who believes in the inherent rationality of your opponent. But the intolerant actor does not operate on shared rational ground. They operate on the principle of elimination. The mechanism reveals that true tolerance is not merely acceptance, it is protection. It demands force against the force trying to dismantle it. The tension is that to remain open, functional, and diverse, you must close the door with decisive firmness. To practice unconditional love for the system requires conditional severity towards the virus. The moment tolerance becomes self-destructive, it ceases to be a virtue and transforms into a fatal flaw. We face this dilemma daily, not just in the grand theater of politics, but in the small, intimate space of our personal boundaries. You tolerate the friend who constantly drains you, the colleague who subtly undermines your accomplishments, the partner whose words chip away at your self-worth. You believe that your patience, your endless supply of second chances, is undeniable proof of your character. But by tolerating behavior aimed at destroying your inner peace and autonomy, you are practicing a form of self-intolerance. You are allowing the intolerant ideology of disrespect to flourish within the ecosystem of your life, sacrificing your own stability at the altar of an impossible, all-encompassing openness. The profound psychological breakthrough is realizing that boundaries are not acts of exclusion, they are acts of rigorous preservation. They define the minimum standard required for tolerance to thrive. When you finally refuse to tolerate the unacceptable, you are not failing your ideal of openness. You are defining the rigorous standard required for true, healthy openness to persist. You shift from a passive receptor of input to an active steward of your own values. It changes the meaning of strength. Strength is not enduring endless pain. Strength is identifying the toxic, eliminatory element and expelling it before it consumes the good. The ultimate hard-won lesson of tolerance is this: you cannot save the ship by inviting the pirates aboard. True openness demands the courage to identify, isolate, and reject that which seeks the destruction of openness itself. The door must close so that the home remains a sanctuary, not a ruin. The Dunning-Kruger effect, the certainty of the uninformed mind. We turn now to the psychological phenomenon that explains why the most ignorant among us often speak with the loudest and most unshakable authority. The Dunning-Kruger effect, the devastating mechanism behind the certainty of the uninformed mind. Have you ever listened to someone passionately argue a point, absolutely convinced of their brilliance, only to realize their foundational knowledge was laughably flawed? Did you ever watch that intense, unshakable conviction and feel a fleeting moment of envy? That feeling, that perfect, untroubled confidence, is the dangerous gift that incompetence bestows upon its victims. It is a psychological trap that shields the unskilled from the very facts that would reveal their deficiencies. This effect describes a cognitive bias where people of low competence in a specific area tend to overestimate their ability significantly. Conversely, experts often underestimate their competence, assuming that tasks easy for them must be easy for others. But the truly cruel twist of the Dunning-Kruger effect is this: incompetence not only causes poor decisions, but it also strips you of the ability to know that you are making poor decisions. You are too unskilled to recognize your own lack of skill. You lack the metacognitive ability to even perceive the knowledge gap. Imagine the landscape of competence as a vast mountain range. When you first step onto the path, learning a new skill, say astrophysics or ethical philosophy, you immediately climb a tiny, dizzying hill. This is the peak of Mount Stupid. You acquire 3 foundational concepts, perhaps 5 key historical facts, and suddenly you feel qualified to write a book, to dominate a debate, or to solve a complex global crisis. You feel 100% certain because your map of the world contains only those 3 facts. But as you continue to climb, as you acquire actual deep knowledge, the mountain range expands terrifyingly before you. You see the sheer scale of what you don't know, the vast canyons of nuance and the infinite ridges of unresolved conflict. The more you learn, the further you feel from the summit. You inevitably descend from the confident peak into the valley of despair, realizing that true knowledge demands endless, frightening complexity. The expert is burdened by complexity. The novice is freed by simplicity. The paradox is brutal because it weaponizes simplicity. Certainty is a psychological refuge. The uninformed mind thrives because it has fewer data points to reconcile, fewer historical conflicts to weigh, and fewer internal doubts to entertain. Doubt, true, paralyzing doubt, is the signature of nascent intelligence. If you are questioning your understanding, if you are paralyzed by the nuances of a moral problem, it means you have acquired enough skill to see the scope of the problem itself. The less you know, the stronger the illusion of comprehension, resulting in an unearned, impenetrable confidence that looks terrifyingly like competence to the outside world. Look at the architecture of modern discourse, especially online, and you will see it is tailor-made for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Algorithms reward speed and simple, forceful assertions over nuance and careful consideration. It is easier and far more profitable to be confidently wrong than laboriously right. We confuse volume with validity. The loudest voices, often backed by the shallowest understanding, dominate the conversation, leaving those who truly grasp the complexity, the experts stuck in the valley of despair, feeling marginalized, silent, and insignificant. They cannot assert simple truths because they know there are no simple truths left. This realization changes how you must assess your own internal landscape. You must recognize that the sensation of absolute certainty is a psychological warning sign, not a confirmation of truth. True growth, true intellectual maturity, involves actively seeking out the perimeter of your own ignorance. It means accepting that the path to competence is paved with paralyzing self-doubt. The expert is not the person who knows everything, but the person who knows precisely how much they still do not know, and carries that humility like a sacred burden. The profound existential dilemma of the Dunning-Kruger effect is this: meaning is found in the long, difficult struggle toward depth, not in the shallow comfort of assumed understanding. The price of true competence is the surrender of certainty. You must choose between the blissful confidence of the fool or the terrifying, expansive doubt of the genuinely wise. Which mountain are you willing to climb, and which certainty are you willing to lose forever? Paradox of vulnerability, finding strength in complete exposure. We must begin by examining the single most fundamental existential armor we wear, the fear of complete exposure. This is the paradox of vulnerability, the idea that the surest way to build resilience is by dismantling the defenses we believe define it. You spend your life constructing walls, brick by careful brick, designed to keep out judgment, hurt, and rejection. But have you ever considered that these very walls, meant to secure your safety, are actually the deepest chambers of your isolation? What if the thing you fear showing the most, the raw, unedited core of your being, is the only thing capable of truly setting you free? We've culturally mislabeled vulnerability. It is not equivalent to fragility or emotional instability. Philosophically, vulnerability is the honest acceptance of inherent human riskliness. It is the conscious decision to drop the mask when the audience is armed with expectation and potential judgment. Its relevance is paramount because every meaningful connection, every profound act of creation, and every moment of authentic living requires you to forfeit control over how you are perceived. Without the willingness to risk being misunderstood, you never grant permission for true understanding. Imagine you are a medieval warrior preparing for battle. You spend years crafting the most perfect, impenetrable suit of armor. It is heavy, forged from the strongest steel, capable of deflecting any blow. But once the fight begins, that armor becomes your prison. It restricts your movement, depletes your stamina simply through its crushing weight, and prevents you from seeing peripheral threats clearly. The lighter, faster, seemingly exposed fighter, relying on agility and skill rather than pure defense, often survives because they can adapt. Your emotional armor operates the same way. It keeps you rigid, slow to pivot, and exhaustingly heavy to carry through the decades of your life. It protects you from pain, yes, but it equally prevents the inflow of genuine human warmth. The psychological mechanism driving this self-imprisonment is cunningly simple. The fear of vulnerability operates under a false premise that if we hide our flaws, they cease to exist, or at least cease to matter to others. But when you refuse to be seen fully, you are demanding that love and acceptance be conditional, only for the edited version, only for the flawless facade. This creates an impossible inner conflict. You are forced to dedicate massive mental energy to maintaining the appearance of perfection, energy that should be used for growth and connection. The deeper you hide, the deeper the shame metastasizes because the secret you guard is the underlying belief that the real you is fundamentally unworthy. When you choose exposure, that shame loses its leverage immediately. It's like exposing a negative photograph to light. The image is ruined, but the secret, corrosive power of the latent image is destroyed. You take away the enemy's best weapon, the element of surprise regarding your own truth. In the modern landscape of curated digital perfection, this paradox is amplified tenfold. We are constantly performing a state of invulnerability online. Perfect holidays, perfect careers, perfect happiness. This performance creates an internal dissonance so powerful it manifests as generalized anxiety and existential fatigue. You become trapped between the optimized version of yourself you present and the complex, messy truth you actually live. The courage to stand up and simply say, "I am struggling," or "I don't have the answer," in a world obsessed with projecting certainty, is the highest form of intellectual and emotional rebellion, and the quickest route back to genuine human solidarity. The profound shift that occurs when you embrace vulnerability is the recognition that the ability to be hurt is inseparable from the ability to love deeply. You trade the illusion of emotional control for actual emotional capacity. When you are completely exposed, there is no longer anything left to fear losing in terms of integrity or truth. The worst-case scenario, rejection, has been neutralized because you've already offered the truth. If that truth is rejected, the rejection is of the narrative of you, not the self you have chosen to inhabit. This allows you to stand present, unburdened by the weight of prediction, ready to receive life, both the pain and the ecstasy, without the filtering distortion of fear. Consider this: the space where you feel the most naked and unprotected is precisely the space where true, unassailable power resides. Vulnerability is not the moment you are about to fall. It is the moment you choose to stand, fully visible, on the edge of the abyss, knowing that the integrity of your posture is your only true foundation. To be completely exposed is not to be weak. it is to be undeniable. The tyranny of the immediate, the future lost in the present. Have you ever felt like you are running perpetually, caught in a continuous, high-speed sprint, yet somehow always managing to stay exactly in the same place? That specific kind of deep exhaustion where the urgent demands of the now completely and ruthlessly overshadow the profound needs of tomorrow. This feeling is not laziness, and it is not necessarily poor time management. It is a symptom of a deep structural collapse in temporal prioritization, a modern dilemma where the immediate moment holds us hostage. We live in the age of relentless immediacy, where every incoming stimulus, be it a notification, an email, or a sudden perceived crisis, is treated by our systems as a priority alert, demanding instant resolution. The urgent has entirely displaced the important. This constant reactive state of professional and personal firefighting is what we call the tyranny of the immediate. It is the existential weight of a culture built for instantaneous response, where patience is no longer a valued virtue, but is often framed as a technological or intellectual failure. This mindset defines how we consume, how we work, and, most crucially, how we fundamentally forget the purpose of what we were meant to be building. To grasp its power, imagine you are the captain of a vessel heading toward a distant, significant destination, a landmark goal you dreamed of achieving. But your ship is small, and modern life has installed a dozen high-frequency sensors that track miniature failures. Every 5 minutes, a crew member sprints to you with a tiny, immediate leak, a drip in the galley, a squeaky hinge, a broken cup, or a flash of red on an unread message count. These problems are individually manageable, but their accumulation is relentless. You never get to look at the navigational charts, never adjust the sails for the strategic long-term currents, because your attention is always bent double, dealing with the incessant miniature crises of the moment. Soon, you realize you haven't navigated for weeks. You are still sailing, you are certainly busy, but your trajectory has flatlined. The journey is active, yet the destination is forgotten, lost in the noise of administrative upkeep. The fundamental paradox of the immediate is that it feels deeply productive. It delivers instant, high-frequency, small rewards, the addictive dopamine hit of clearing an inbox, solving a sudden, unexpected problem, or successfully swiping away a notification to zero. This flood of micro-victories gives us the sharp, seductive illusion of control and efficacy. We mistake frantic motion for actual, sustained progress, the long-term goal, the book you want to write, the relationship you want to deepen, the foundational skill you want to master, demands large, dedicated blocks of seemingly unproductive silence, periods where you are not reacting but deeply creating. These activities offer delayed, compound gratification and require significant cognitive load. They feel initially like failure because they offer no instant checkmark or immediate praise. The brain, hardwired for efficiency, naturally defaults to the simpler, faster, less meaningful tasks, perpetually mortgaging the quality and depth of your future self merely to pay for the cheap, fleeting convenience of your present self. Look at your immediate environment. Look at the metrics of modern work. Everything is ruthlessly optimized for rapid throughput, never for profound, slow thought. We reward busyness. We celebrate being perpetually swamped. The quiet, deliberate time necessary for strategic thinking or genuine creativity is now considered an embarrassing luxury, or, even worse, interpreted as a sign of laziness. You are conditioned to believe that if you are not instantly responding, you are somehow failing. If you are not constantly available, you are deficient. This immediacy has not just stolen your schedule. It has eroded your cognitive space, trapping your focus in a suffocating, relentless now, where the only thing that seems genuinely real is the flashing icon demanding your attention right this very second. The profound philosophical impact of this tyranny is the fragmentation of existential meaning. Meaning is inherently linked to narrative, to coherently connecting the dots between your disciplined actions today and the desired, realized outcome tomorrow. When the present is perpetually dominant and overwhelming, the narrative collapses entirely. Your life becomes a rapid-fire series of disconnected, reactionary events rather than a single coherent story. You feel busy, yes, but you also feel deeply hollowed out because the vast majority of the energy you expended was invested purely in maintenance, not sustainable growth. The immediate steals not just your precious time, but your deep sense of self-authorship. It turns you from the conscious playwright of your existence into a frantic, extra-reacting endlessly to sudden, chaotic stage directions. The future is ultimately lost, not because it was too difficult or complex to reach, but because the path to it was constantly obscured by a mountain of small, loud, urgent clutter. The true freedom isn't the chaotic ability to do whatever you want right now, in this very moment, but the disciplined courage to consciously and deliberately ignore the noise of the now so that the substantial self you want to become is actually made possible. Remember this central truth. The price of instant relief is almost always the forced cancellation of long-term fulfillment. Do not let the relentless noise of today completely silence the quiet, profound symphony of your ultimate, long-held intent. The lottery paradox, rational beliefs, and the impossibility of knowledge. Why is it that the things you are statistically certain of often violently clash with the singular, unpredictable moment of reality? You walk through life making peace with risk, trusting that the vast statistical landscape will protect you, yet you know, deep down, that probability is a cold shield against destiny. This fundamental tension forms the essence of the lottery paradox, a powerful logical instrument designed to expose the unstable foundation beneath our most basic definitions of knowledge. The paradox, formulated by philosopher Henry Kaiberg, targets the simple, seemingly sound rule we apply every day. If something is highly, overwhelmingly probable, then you are justified in believing it. Furthermore, we often treat these justified beliefs as knowledge. But what happens when you string together thousands of these perfectly rational beliefs? That is where the certainty breaks. The paradox forces us to confront the limitations of defining knowledge purely as a high threshold of probability, leading to a breakdown in the consistency of our belief system. Imagine a truly enormous lottery, say 100,000 tickets issued to 100,000 people. You hold ticket number 1. The probability that your ticket will lose is 99.999 out of 100,000. It is completely, rationally justified for you to believe that ticket number 1 will not win. Now let's apply that rational belief consistently across the entire field. It is equally rational for you to believe that ticket number 2 will not win, that ticket number 3 will not win, and so on, all the way to ticket number 100,000. Each individual belief is statistically sound. Each belief is a piece of rational knowledge, if we accept probability as the standard. Here is the fissure, the silent, existential trap. If you combine all those separate rational beliefs, you are logically led to the staggering conclusion that no ticket will win. But that is utterly, demonstrably false. The premise of a lottery is that one ticket must win. The contradiction is immediate and paralyzing. You have a collection of justified, rational beliefs, ticket N will lose, that, when aggregated, produce a completely irrational, false conclusion. No one will win. The entire system of highly probable beliefs collapses under the weight of logical conjunction. This mechanism reveals the terrifying instability in how we treat the future. We often confuse statistical certainty with epistemological certainty. You believe your flight will land safely because the probability of an accident is astronomically low. You believe your house will not burn down tomorrow. You believe the friend you trust will not betray you. These are not beliefs based on absolute evidence. They are functional assumptions based on overwhelming odds. They are the scaffolding upon which we build the daily illusion of control. The lottery paradox insists that we cannot simply accumulate high probabilities and call the result knowledge. If we do, we inevitably know things that are false, simultaneously holding mutually exclusive truths. It highlights that the 0.001% chance, the marginal possibility that we rationally discard, is not merely a statistical anomaly. It is the realm of reality itself, the space where the future is actually realized. The psychological impact of internalizing this paradox is profound. It strips away the comfort of purely rational living. You realize that you cannot logically know the outcome of any probabilistic event, even those that seem settled. Knowledge requires something more than mere high likelihood. It demands an absolute connection to truth that probability inherently lacks. The paradox teaches you that living is the art of choosing to operate on necessary but unstable certainty, knowing that the structural integrity of your assumptions is perpetually threatened by the single successful losing ticket. The world is built on rational belief, but the truth rests in the anomaly. You never truly know until the moment the winning number is called, and in life, the winning number is called only once. Embrace the gap between what you are justified in believing and the truth you cannot escape. The paradox of progress. The more we gain, the more we are missing. Have you ever noticed that the things designed to save you time ultimately steal your attention? That the relentless march toward comfort and convenience has somehow made life feel fundamentally heavy, devoid of necessary friction? This is the core tragedy of optimized existence. We pursue efficiency thinking it will liberate us from difficulty, but we often end up trading resilience for fragility. The paradox of progress is not simply about technological advancement, it is about what that advancement necessitates we eliminate. Progress, as defined in the modern era, faster, easier, more automated, does not just add to our lives, it silently subtracts the need for certain crucial human attributes: patience, sustained effort, shared communal struggle, and the deep, silent space necessary for creation and self-discovery. The more complete and optimized our systems become, the more incomplete and fragmented we feel as individuals. We are gaining incredible power over our environment while simultaneously losing grounding within ourselves. Consider the metaphor of the perfect map. We now carry devices that give us instant, turn-by-turn directions to anywhere on Earth. We have gained absolute certainty and eliminated the possibility of being truly lost. But what have we lost in the process? We lost the need to develop our internal sense of navigation. We lost the necessary risk of taking a wrong turn that forces us to interact with strangers or discover an unexpected place. The elimination of scarcity, the scarcity of information, the scarcity of connection, the scarcity of entertainment, has led to a scarcity of deep meaning and presence. We gained the world's library but lost the memory of where we left our keys, or how to truly sit still. The mechanism of this paradox rests on substitution. We substitute skilled, slow effort with automated ease. We substitute authentic, messy, time-consuming connection with optimized, filtered, and asynchronous communication. And here's the profound tension: the very elements we eliminate in the name of progress, difficulty, slowness, error, and boredom, are often the processes that generate resilience, forge profound insight, and ground our sense of self-worth. When everything is easy, nothing is truly earned. When every moment is optimized for consumption or productivity, there is no room for revelation, no space for the self to simply be. We gain exhaustive control over the external environment but lose vital control over our inner quiet. We are, in a very real sense, optimizing ourselves out of meaningful existence. Look at your own relationship with the current moment. You carry a device that offers instant access to nearly all recorded human knowledge, entertainment, and connectivity. This is the tremendous gain, yet simultaneously you struggle profoundly with focus, with defining what is enough, and with the pervasive sense of feeling perpetually behind, even while moving at lightning speed. We have engineered happiness into a consumer product, believing that if we just acquire the right systems, the right app, the right biohack, the next upgrade, the feeling of missing something essential will vanish. But the feeling persists because the missing thing is not material. It is the existential friction required to create value. We mistake convenience for fulfillment. This paradox necessitates a radical psychological shift. We must recognize that the most valuable items in life are often inefficiencies. Patience is inefficient. Deep, meandering conversation is inefficient. Creating something analog with your own hands, slowly, with mistakes, is profoundly inefficient. Yet these are the sources of gravity for the soul. The philosophical awakening is realizing that true liberation is not freedom from friction, but rather competence within it. If the path is too smooth, we don't build the internal muscles necessary to handle genuine crisis or even simple boredom. The gain of comfort has resulted in the slow, unseen loss of psychological toughness and internal resilience. So the critical question is not what modern life has provided, but what modern life has quietly demanded you give up in return for that provision. The true cost of convenience is often the depth of your own living. We are progressing rapidly toward a future that has no essential need for us to be present, engaged, or personally skilled. The ultimate paradox of progress is this: we gain the whole world in terms of access and ease, and in the process lose the very self designed to appreciate it. The argument from silence, the weight of unsaid things. Have you ever waited for a text that never came, or sat across from someone knowing a vital truth hovered just beyond the air they were breathing? The tension wasn't in the words spoken, but in the gravitational pull of the ones omitted. This is where we encounter the argument from silence, not as a dry logical fallacy, but as an existential weight pressing down on your shoulders. Logically, the argumentum e silentio is the inference that because a source, a document, or a person makes no explicit mention of X, then X must not exist. In courts of law or historical analysis, this is shaky ground. Absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence, but in the volatile, hypersensitive theater of your own life, it is the bedrock of anxiety. We don't just notice the lack of confirmation, we treat the absence as definitive evidence. When life, or a loved one, doesn't affirm meaning, doesn't explicitly guarantee stability, or doesn't loudly proclaim devotion, we conclude that the corresponding meaninglessness, instability, or rejection must be true. The silence becomes the loudest accusation. Imagine you are studying an ancient blueprint for a vast machine, the machine being your own purpose, your relationship, or your potential. You find sections describing the gears, the necessary resources, and the complex levers, but crucial details about the power source are consistently missing. The architect never drew it. The text makes no mention of the engine. A rational mind might seek another document, acknowledging the current one is incomplete. Your terrified, existential self concludes, instantaneously, the machine is designed not to work. It is fundamentally lacking, destined for inertia. The blank space where the engine should be is louder, more defining than all the labeled positive components combined. This void becomes your definitive proof of failure. The profound paradox of silence is this: explicit rejection hurts, but it is bounded. It provides a clear perimeter for your grief, allowing you to eventually step outside the defined boundaries of loss. Silence, however, is boundless. A negative answer is one answer. A prolonged empty silence is potentially every negative answer simultaneously. It is the vast, untamed narrative space where your deepest, most personalized anxieties rush in to fill the vacuum. You stop arguing against the external reality of the situation and start arguing against the infinitely proliferating potential truths generated by the silence itself. This is the fundamental mechanism by which uncertainty paralyzes us far more effectively than catastrophe ever could. Catastrophe forces action. Uncertainty forces endless internal review. In the modern age, the argument from silence is amplified by efficiency. The professional email that receives no reply is often not evidence of malice, but simple lack of priority, a triage of attention. Yet, we immediately read the void as personal rejection. The lack of consistent validation on a public or private platform isn't merely invisibility, it's non-engagement, but the argument from silence whispers a corrosive narrative. If you were truly relevant, truly loved, truly valued, someone would have acknowledged you definitively and immediately. We are constantly running silent algorithms in our heads, checking for the presence of affirmation, and when the API returns nothing, we instantly default to the narrative of inadequacy. We allow the sheer logistical noise of the world to translate directly into our personal perceived worth. The cumulative psychological impact is that we begin to rely entirely on external noise to define our internal reality. We become detectives searching solely for the absence of evidence, concluding that if meaning, joy, or love doesn't shout its presence, it must not exist. We mistake the quiet room for the empty house. But the argument from silence is often merely a reflection of limited perspective. Perhaps the silence signifies not absence, but absolute integration. Perhaps the truth is so foundational, so vast, and so obvious that it requires no label or announcement, like the gravity holding you to the earth or the air filling your lungs. You do not require a daily broadcast to confirm their existence, yet you never doubt their presence. The weight of unsaid things is real, but it is a weight you assign, not a law of the universe. True courage lies not in passively enduring the silence until someone breaks it for you, but in choosing to believe that the map of your life is incomplete, that the silence is merely fertile ground, and that the greatest, most enduring meaning you possess is often the one that requires no defense, no fanfare, and no explicit confirmation from a world too busy running its own incomplete narrative. Stop arguing against the void. The most important truths whisper, and they always start with you. The golden rule. The selfless act that demands reciprocity. The burden of altruism. When doing good is a calculated investment, settle into that quiet space within you, the one that admires perfect altruism. Now ask yourself, when you give freely, when you perform an act of pure kindness without any obvious benefit, are you truly giving, or are you secretly launching a contract? You have been taught since childhood the central doctrine of human morality, the golden rule. Treat others as you wish to be treated. It sounds simple, it sounds ethical, it sounds like the bedrock of a functioning society built on mutual respect. But look closer, deeper, beneath the polished surface of selfless action, and you will find perhaps the most demanding paradox of the human condition. The altruistic act that requires reciprocity to feel complete. The context of the golden rule is almost universally misunderstood. We frame it as a principle of outflow, an instruction to sacrifice your self-interest for the well-being of the other. Philosophically, it anchors universal human rights and duties, but psychologically, its very structure implies a transaction. It is not give because the recipient needs it. It is give because by giving, you set a precedent for how you will receive. It is a preventative measure. It is insurance. It is an investment in the social future, paid for in kindness. The moment you define morality in terms of reciprocity, you have stripped it of its purity. You have turned the highest moral duty into the ultimate self-serving hedge. Consider the ethical ledger, the invisible scorecard you carry throughout your life. Every good deed you perform, especially those requiring effort or sacrifice, is logged in this internal accounting system. Imagine paying off a stranger's medical bill anonymously. You stand back, the recipient never knowing your name. On paper, this is perfection. But internally, the ledger tallies the cost and then waits for the repayment. And where does the repayment come from, if not the recipient? It comes from the self. The repayment is the reduction of cognitive dissonance, the surge of righteousness, the validation of identity. I am a good person. You did not perform the selfless act for the stranger. You performed it for the narrative of yourself. The feeling of moral superiority is the dividend you cashed out. This is the great deconstruction of the mechanism. Genuine altruism, the kind that demands absolutely nothing in return, is perhaps biologically impossible for the average human being. We are wired for exchange. When we offer kindness, We are not primarily seeking material repayment, but rather a validation of the act itself. The tension arises in the gap between our intent, I want to help, and our expectation, I need to feel good about helping. When your good deed is met with silence, apathy, or even hostility, that spike of disappointment you feel, that flash of, they didn't appreciate what I did, is the sound of the reciprocal contract defaulting. That disappointment is the proof that the kindness was not a gift, but a loan. And you just realize the borrower has no intention of paying you back. This paradox plays out relentlessly in the modern environment, particularly where visibility is currency. Look at performative kindness on social media. People document their donations, their volunteer work, their small acts of mercy. The camera does not capture the selfless moment. The camera completes the transaction. The deed itself is merely the raw material. The likes, the positive comments, the affirmation of the community, that is the profit. When we broadcast our good deeds, we are not inspiring others. We are simply ensuring the witness is present so that the golden rule's demand for reciprocity can be fulfilled in the form of social credit and identity affirmation. We use others' suffering to purchase a stronger sense of self. The psychological impact of realizing this truth is profound. It's not an invitation to cynicism, but to radical honesty. You do not need to eradicate your self-interest. You only need to stop pretending that your self-interest doesn't exist. True ethical maturity is achieved when you realize you perform kindness not because you are purely good, but because being kind makes your life better, more coherent, and less painful. The freedom lies in accepting the selfishness inherent in selflessness. Stop viewing kindness as a moral tax you must pay. See it as an internal utility you choose to optimize. This realization doesn't diminish the good done in the world, it simply illuminates the engine driving it. And perhaps the only truly pure act is the one where you forgive the world and yourself for demanding the receipt. The absurdity of hope, believing in tomorrow while knowing the end. Think about the future you are meticulously planning. You save, you schedule, you invest time, effort, and emotion into a tomorrow you fundamentally know is not guaranteed and in the long run is already accounted for by dust, entropy, and universal dissolution. You know this truth intellectually, deeply, sometimes painfully. Yet, you still set the alarm for next week. You still buy the tickets for next summer. You still make the appointment. Why do you still sign the 30-year lease when you understand that every single minute is already a countdown? This tension is not simple optimism. It is the philosophical absurd made practical. It is the fundamental dissonance between the cosmic no, the cold, hard reality of finality, and the persistent, necessary personal yes. I will wake up, I will try again, things might be better. Hope, in this existential sense, is not a fluffy, naive feeling. It is a profound, biological, and psychological act of defiance against known reality. It is the most beautiful, functional cognitive dissonance we possess, allowing us to operate in the face of impossible odds. We are fundamentally wired to project forward, even when the projection ends in a singularity. Imagine holding a stopwatch that is counting down to a fixed, known zero. Let's call it the ultimate deadline, the moment the game must end. You cannot stop the clock, and you cannot renegotiate the time. Yet, every single day you use that rapidly diminishing time to build a small, intricate, perfect sandcastle right on the beach. You know the tide is coming, you can feel the spray of the water already, cold and certain, but you are focused meticulously on perfecting the turret, adding a precise shell to the facade. The objective calculation of the universe says building is useless, redundant, even foolish. But the internal, subjective drive demands construction. The utility of the sandcastle is zero, yet the meaning derived from the work is everything. If we truly internalize the futility, if we truly lived inside the cold calculus of finality, we would cease to move. Action requires projected value, and projected value requires hope. The mechanism of hope, therefore, is a necessary evolutionary override. It is the brain's elegant, brutal filtering system, selectively ignoring the terminal data point in favor of the immediate, actionable moment. We create linear meaning, first step, second step, conclusion, to survive cyclical reality, birth, decay, rebirth of components. The tension arises when the filter inevitably slips, usually late at night, and you suddenly confront the radical fragility of everything you built precisely because you chose to hope. You feel the weight of knowing that this intricate life structure is temporary, and that feeling is the price paid for momentum. Look at your life now. Look at the financial portfolio you are monitoring daily, the complicated relationships you are working hard to mend, the elaborate promises you make to those you love. You execute these massive long-term plans while simultaneously monitoring a news cycle that screams fragility, climate disaster, global instability, unexpected illness, political fragmentation. You are making monumental, decades-long investments in a future you can barely guarantee the next 24 hours of. This is not carelessness. This is the daily negotiation with the absurd, the necessary lie we tell ourselves to stay engaged. When you acknowledge that hope is inherently absurd, something profound shifts. It ceases to be a passive wish, something you wait for or pray for, and becomes a radical, active choice. You are no longer waiting for meaning to be delivered by some external cosmic guarantee. You are asserting meaning through the very act of believing in the next step, despite the evidence. The value of the sandcastle is not in its duration, but in the attention paid during its creation. This realization is freedom. If the system is ultimately pointless, then the point is whatever you decide to exert your energy toward right now. The beauty of this hope is that it requires no external validation. It is self-justifying. You don't hope because you expect to win the cosmic game. You hope because the act of preparation, the act of construction, and the intentional assertion of value into time is the only truly meaningful resistance you have against oblivion. To believe in tomorrow is the highest, most defiant form of rebellion against yesterday's certain inevitabilities. If you reach this far, you're one of the few who stayed conscious until the end. Write, "I know the secret" in the comments, and share this reflection forward.